ধর্ষিত জন্য কোনো শোক প্রস্তাব বা নিবেদন করার কোনো আমি দেখতে পাইনি। আজকে আমি আমার জীবনের একটা
So, namaste everyone, and I think we are back to the event. And my namaskar to all the guests who are now joining in. Please just allow me a few minutes to bring people to the panel. So, just give me a few minutes. I'm just adding all the people to the speaker slot.
হ্যাঁ এখন তো কিছু বলছে না। ম্যাডাম আমি কি বলবো?
Namaste, Rabindranath Dattaji. So, we have Rabindranath Dattaji with us today. He is one of the oldest survivors of the Noakhali Genocide, and he will be speaking in Bangla. And we have somebody who will translate it for the rest of us. So, Rabindranath ji, आपको सुनने में आ रहा है? मैं बोल रही हूँ।
উনি তো বলছেন এবার। আচ্ছা, এবার আমি আমার বলা আরম্ভ করছি। এটা একটু লাগিয়ে দিন। আচ্ছা, নোয়াখালী জেনোসাইড সম্বন্ধে বলতে গিয়ে তার আগে তার প্রেক্ষাপটটা একটু বলা দরকার। যখন 200 বছর প্রায় ইংরেজরা শাসন করে, যখন সেকেন্ড ওয়ার্ল্ড ওয়ার পরে যারা দেশ ছেড়ে যাওয়ার জন্য প্রস্তুত নিচ্ছিল, তখন মুসলিম লীগ তারা দাবি তুলল যে তারা পাকিস্তান চায় এবং ভারতবর্ষের সঙ্গে থাকা একসাথে তাদের পক্ষে সম্ভব নয়। সেই সময় আমি 1946-এর ডাইরেক্ট অ্যাকশন ডেতে আমি ঢাকা শহরে ছিলাম। ঢাকার উবারিতে আমার বাসস্থান, এবং তখন আমি ঢাকায় ফরওয়ার্ড ব্লক পার্টি করতাম, সেকুলার পার্টি। 16 অগাস্ট একটা ডাইরেক্ট অ্যাকশন ডে হবে আমরা শুনেছি, কিন্তু এর যে কি ব্যাপার কিছুই আমরা বলতে পারছিলাম না। 16 অগাস্ট যখন নাকি সন্ধ্যার পরেই ঢাকা শহরে হাজার হাজার মুসলমান নারায়ে তাকবীর, আল্লাহু আকবার, পাকিস্তান জিন্দাবাদ এই স্লোগান দিয়ে সমস্ত ঢাকা শহরটাকে একটা ইয়েতে পর্যবেসিত করে। আমরা সমস্ত হিন্দুরা সমস্ত ভয়ে, যেসব বাড়িতে সিকিউরিটি আছে সেই সব জায়গায় গিয়ে আমরা আশ্রয় নিলাম। এবং আমাদের পাশেই ছিল ঢাকায় হরদেও গ্লাস ফ্যাক্টরির মালিক ধনুরাম টুডি এবং ব্রজলাল টুডির বাড়ি। সেই বাড়িতে আমরা আশ্রয় নিলাম, এবং আমাদের পাড়ার অনেক লোকরাই সেখানে আশ্রয় নিল। এবং তাদের দোতলা ছাদের উপর দেখলাম চারধারে দাউ দাউ করে আগুন জ্বলছে, আর মুসলমানরা সব নারায়ে তাকবীর, আল্লাহু আকবার, পাকিস্তান জিন্দাবাদ এই সমস্ত স্লোগান দিচ্ছে। আর যেখানে মিক্সড পাড়া ছিল সেখান থেকে হিন্দুরা সব পালিয়ে এসে আপনার হিন্দু পাড়াতে আশ্রয় নিচ্ছে। যাক, এভাবে রাত 10টা অবধি এভাবে চলার পরদিন থেকেই ঢাকায় শহরে বহু জায়গায় খুনাখুনি, দাঙ্গা একতরফা ভাবে মুসলমানরা করে গেল।
रविंद्रनाथ जी, आपको ट्रांसलेट करने के लिए अभी कोई ट्रांसलेट कर रहा है आपको? अभी ट्रांसलेट करते हैं, ही विल ट्रांसलेट। सो जस्ट गिव अ फ्यू पॉजेस बीच बीच में, वो बीच में आपको बांग्ला से इंग्लिश में ट्रांसलेट करेंगे। So I think Stories of Bengali Hindus is here. Can you just translate what he said into English also?
Yes, namaskar. Rabindranath ji had said that what happened before the Noakhali. So the Muslim League first declared the intention of creating Pakistan, and since their demands were not being met suitably, they asked for direct action. It was to be organized on 16th August 1946. Now, Mr. Rabindranath Ji at that time was a resident of Wari in Dhaka, and he used to be a Shechosebak, that is like a volunteer for All India Forward Bloc. So that was the party of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. So Mr. Rabindranath Ji had heard about direct action day, but at that time people, they were not sure what was going to happen, like what was direct action. So this is a common fact that Calcutta was the center of direct action day, but even the riots happened in Dhaka, and Mr. Rabindranath Ji is a personal witness to the riots that happened in Dhaka. So on the 16th of August, I think when the situation was becoming tense, the Hindus, they shifted to the more Hindu areas. Wari, I think, if I believe, was a little bit of a mixed area. So they were going to their areas, and suddenly, I think it was in that day or the next day, if I'm correct, slogan started like Narae Takbir, Allahu Akbar, and Ladke Lenge Pakistan. So translating that, they would fight and take Pakistan. That was their slogan. So yeah, রবীন্দ্রনাথ দাদু, আপনি আরেকটু বলেন, তারপর আমি অনুবাদ করব, আপনি আরো বলেন।
আচ্ছা, এরপরে ঠিক রায়ট আরম্ভ, মানে 16 আগস্টের 3-4 দিন পরে আমরা শহীদ দীনেশ গুপ্তের একটা লাইব্রেরি ছিল, উয়ারি লাইব্রেরি, সেখানে আমরা ফরওয়ার্ড ব্লকের ছেলেরা সব বসে আছি। বইকাল 3-3:30 নাগাদ এক ট্রাক বোঝাই ডেড বডি আমাদের উয়ারি পাড়ায় পাঠিয়ে দিল পুলিশ পাহারায়। তার একটা তো আমরা সমস্ত ইয়াং ছেলেরা সেখানে গিয়ে উপস্থিত হলাম এবং দেখলাম যে ট্রাক ভর্তি ডেড বডি এবং সমস্ত বডিগুলো উলঙ্গ। তার মধ্যে আপনার ইয়াং ছেলে, অল্প বয়সের ছেলে এবং মহিলারাও ছিল, মহিলাদের ডেড বডিগুলো উলঙ্গ। তা আমরা তখন হরদেও গ্লাস ফ্যাক্টরির মালিক ধনুবাবু এবং ব্রজবাবুর নিকট গিয়ে বললাম যে আপনারা যদি লাকড়ি দেন তাহলে আমরা ওদের গ্লাস ফ্যাক্টরির বয়লার চলতো লাকড়ির জন্য, কাঠের যেতে। ওরা বলছে হ্যাঁ, যত ইচ্ছা তোমরা লাকড়ি নাও। এবং সেই দৃশ্য দেখার জন্য প্রায় 1-1.5 লোক জমে গেল। আমরা সমস্ত লোকদেরকে, মানে আমি নিজে ট্রাকে উঠে দেখলাম যে সমস্ত ডেড বডি গুলো উলঙ্গ এবং প্রচুর ডেড বডি, এবং নিচে ত্রিপাল পেতে দিয়েছে এবং আমাদের পায়ের পাতা রক্তে ডুবে গিয়েছে। আমরা ধরে ধরে প্রথম 6-7টা লোককে নামালাম এবং এইভাবে সারিবদ্ধভাবে শুয়ে দিলাম। তার একটা ফটো আমি তুলে রেখেছি, সেটা আমি দেখাচ্ছি। ফটোটা দিন।
ওকে, সো
এই যে ফটোটা দেখতে পাচ্ছেন আপনারা?
হ্যাঁ, পাচ্ছি।
এই ফটোটা, ঠিক আছে?
হ্যাঁ, স্পষ্ট দেখা
এই ফটোটা আমি তুলেছি এবং এর মধ্যে এক ভদ্রমহিলার একটা ফটো, মানে ডেড বডি নামালাম। তার সমস্ত বডিটা উলঙ্গ, তার স্তন এবং তলপেট কামড়ে দাঁত বসে আছে, মানে এই অবস্থা। ওই দেখে একজন ভদ্রলোক অজ্ঞান হয়ে গিয়েছিল। আরেকদিন বললো কি, একটা ডেড বডি ট্রাক বোঝায়, তার মধ্যে 6টা বাচ্চা ছেলের ডেড বডি এলো, একটিরও মাথা নেই, মানে পা ধরে লাইট পোস্টের সাথে বাড়ি দিয়ে মাথাগুলো উড়িয়েছে।
হ্যাঁ, আপনি একটু দাঁড়াবেন, আমি অনুবাদটা করে দিচ্ছি, তারপর হ্যাঁ, আমি অনুবাদটা করে দিচ্ছি। So he then says, 3 to 4 days later, after the vandalism and the rioting had cooled down in Dhaka, he was in Wari library. So in that library, at around 3 to 4 p.m., a truck came that was filled with dead bodies. So, and all the bodies were naked, and among the naked bodies there were even dead bodies of women that was also naked. So he had went to Dinesh Babu, if I remember the name correctly, and had asked for wood to perform the cremation rites of the people, and those were Hindu dead bodies. So approximately 1,500 people had come at that day to witness the truck and the dead bodies that was laid over there. So he and a few other young men, Mr. Rabindranath and few other young men, they climbed on the truck, and below the truck there was a tripal. So I believe tripal may be a plastic sheet. I don't know what exactly that means. So a tripal was laid over there so that the blood doesn't fall in the ground. It was falling on the tripal. And just a moment. So among the dead bodies, they were naked, and they were even naked dead bodies of a woman, and in a particular dead body, he remembers seeing bite marks, teeth biting into the breasts of a woman and the underside of her belly. That's what he personally saw. And seeing that thing, seeing that horrific sight, one man fainted on the spot. And then they saw dead bodies of 6 young children who did not have their heads were severed off. হ্যাঁ, আপনি বলুন, এই 6টা বাচ্চা এনেছিল, হ্যাঁ, শিশু এনেছিল, তারপরে কি হয়েছে আপনি বলুন।
হ্যাঁ, সেই বাচ্চাগুলোকে যখন আমরা পরপর শুইয়ে দিয়েছি, তার মধ্যে থেকে এক ভদ্রমহিলা একটা বাচ্চাকে জড়িয়ে ধরে বলে, ওই তো আমার গোপাল, মানে এই বলে জড়িয়ে ধরে একদম অজ্ঞান হয়ে গিয়েছে। আর তার অন্যান্য বাড়ির মেম্বাররা সব বিলাপ করে কাঁদতে আরম্ভ করেছে। তা আমি বললাম যে কি করে আইডেন্টিফাই করলেন যে আপনাদের গোপাল? বলছে যে পয়লা বৈশাখ 2 ভাইকে একই সিটের কাপড় কিনে জামা তৈরি করে দিয়েছে, দেখুন ছোট ভাই ওই জামা পরে এসছে। তখন আমি বুঝলাম যে ওই সত্যি ওদের গোপাল। তখন আমরা ওই ডেড বডি গুলো সব পোড়াতে আরম্ভ করেছি, আর ভদ্রমহিলাকে ছাড়ানো যাচ্ছে না, ওর ছেলেকে এত জড়িয়ে ধরেছে। তখন ওই ভদ্রমহিলাকে অনেক পরে আমরা তুলে নিয়ে গিয়ে আলাদা করে ওই ডেড বডি গুলো পোড়ালাম। এভাবে প্রতি মানে 2-3 দিন পরপরই ট্রাক বোঝাই করে ডেড বডি আসতো, আর আমরা এই ডেড বডি গুলো পোড়াতাম। এইভাবে ধরুন
এখন আমি অনুবাদটা করি, ঠিক আছে? হ্যাঁ, আর তারপরে আপনি বলে দেবেন যে নোয়াখালী কিভাবে হলো। এটা তো আপনি ঢাকাটা বলছেন, হ্যাঁ, কারণ ঢাকার পরে
প্রেক্ষাপটটা বললাম আর কি।
ঠিক, আচ্ছা, প্রেক্ষাপট। ওকে, সো Mr. Rabindranath ji said that he is telling the precursor to the Noakhali genocide, where the events that happened in Calcutta, of course, and in Dhaka. So he's describing the precursors in Dhaka, and he will then be telling about the Noakhali. So the 6 dead bodies of the children that he saw, they did not have a head. A lady came and saw a dead body and screamed, "Ei to amar Gopal," meaning here is my Gopal, this is my son Gopal. So she went to the dead body of her child and hugged him tightly. And then the volunteers, including Mr. Rabindranath ji, asked, "How do you know that this particular dead body is the body of your son?" Because they all did not have any head. The head was completely chopped off. So how did you identify? Then the lady told him that on the 1st of Boishak, that is the Bengali New Year, Poila Boishak, she had brought 2 dresses for her 2 sons, and those were similar dresses. So what she saw was that her son was lying there with the head severed off, but she could recognize him only with her dress. So she hugged the son tightly, and if I remember, she then fainted after that. So like that, every 3 to 4 days, trucks used to come carrying more and more dead bodies, and Mr. Rabindranath ji and the volunteers, they used to go get the wood, perform their last rites, and this was a ongoing process, and it lasted for many days. হ্যাঁ, এখন আপনি নোয়াখালীর সম্বন্ধে বলুন। আপনি যখন গেছিলেন নোয়াখালী 2 বার, কি বলে, দাঙ্গার আগে, দাঙ্গার পরে, ওটা আপনি বলুন।
এরপরে হলো কি আপনার, এটা হলো আপনার অগাস্টে ধরুন এই সব 20-21 মানে 15-16 তারিখ থেকে 20-21-এর মধ্যে এই সব ঢাকার ঘটনা ঘটলো। তারপর আমার অরিজিনাল জন্মস্থান হলো নোয়াখালী ডিস্ট্রিক্টের কালিকাপুর গ্রাম, বেগমগঞ্জ থানা। আমার বাবা সেখানে একটা হাই স্কুলের ইংরেজি টিচার ছিলেন, এবং সেখানে আমার ভাইরা থাকতো, আমি আর আমার ছোট ভাই ঢাকা শহরে থাকতাম। তো সেপ্টেম্বরের মিডলে, মানে 1946 সেপ্টেম্বরের মিডলে আমি আমার নোয়াখালী বাড়িতে যাব ঢাকা থেকে। চৌমনি স্টেশনে নেমে আমার বাড়ি হলো 4 মাইল পশ্চিমে, নৌকোয় করে যেতে হয় খালে, 1 আনা ভাড়া। তো দেখলাম যে যেই নৌকায় আমি চেপেছি তাতে সব জ্যারিকেনের মধ্যে করে পেট্রোল এবং পেট্রোল স্প্রেইং মেশিন এবং বস্তা ভর্তি ভর্তি টুপি, তার মধ্যে সাদা টুপির মধ্যে পাকিস্তানের যে অংশটা ওরা পাকিস্তান করবে সবুজ দিয়ে, এবং তাতে পাকিস্তান জিন্দাবাদ প্লাস কিছু অস্ত্রশস্ত্র নিয়ে সেই নৌকায় হয়ে মানে যাচ্ছে মানে বিভিন্ন থানাতে, এবং প্রত্যেকটাতে লেবেল লেখা যে নোয়াখালী ডিস্ট্রিক্ট মানে থানাগুলোতে মুসলিম লীগ অফিস চন্দ্রগঞ্জ, মুসলিম লীগ অফিস রামগঞ্জ, মুসলিম লীগ অফিস এইভাবে চলতে চলতে মানে ওরা বিভিন্ন জায়গায় ইয়েগুলো নামিয়ে দিচ্ছিল, ওই মানে অগ্নিসংযোগ করার পেট্রোল, স্প্রেইং মেশিন, অস্ত্রশস্ত্র এবং টুপি।
আমি আমার গ্রামের আমি অনুবাদটা করি, একটু অনুবাদটা করছি। হ্যাঁ, so Mr. Rabindranath ji said that the events that he described in Dhaka were till about 21st August as per his memory, and then he he decided to he then tells about his birthplace. So his birthplace is the village of Kalikapur, which was under the Begamganj Thana in the district of Noakhali. So he he was studying in Dhaka at that time, and his father was a teacher in that place. So he was about to go to Noakhali on about September, in the month of September, which was before the genocide that had happened. So he was about to go to Noakhali, and the way to his village was first going to Chowmuhoni. So Chowmuhoni is a prominent town in Noakhali district. The district headquarters was Noakhali town, of course, but among the district towns, Chowmuhoni was a prominent town. So he first had to go to Chowmuhoni, and then from Chowmuhoni he had to take a boat to his village. So this is a point that I will be making. I'll describe the geography of Noakhali. This is what I'm saying. So Noakhali, the name basically means new creek. So Noakhali consisted of a lot of creeks, a lot of water bodies, which are creeks, and it was mostly navigated by boats, which is essentially how he went to his home. And many new islands had come up. That is the geography of that. So while going to his home on a boat before the genocide, he saw the boat having some white skull caps. They were having jerry cans which contained petrol. They were having petrol spraying devices, and in the white skull caps there was a map of Pakistan drawn over there. I mean, essentially an Indian map with the demarcation of Pakistan, and Pakistan Zindabad was written on that. And those were being carried to, and of course the boat also contained weapons, and those were being carried to the Muslim League offices in different villages. I think he mentioned Chandraganj and Ramganj. I think he mentioned these two villages. হ্যাঁ, আপনি আরো বলুন পরে কি হলো, আপনি যখন নৌকায় যাচ্ছিলেন।
এইভাবে মানে দাঙ্গা হাঙ্গামার করার জন্য পেট্রোল এবং এটিয়ে বিভিন্ন মুসলিম লীগ অফিসে পাঠিয়ে দিল। তবে এর মধ্যে কয়েকদিন পরেই বেগমগঞ্জ থানার কাছে একটা মিটিং কল করলো। গোলাম সারওয়ার সেখানে প্রধান বক্তা ছিলেন। তিনি সেখানে বক্তৃতাতে মুসলমানদেরকে বললেন এরকম কলকাতাতে মুসলমানদেরকে হিন্দুরা ব্যাপক হারে হত্যা করেছে, অতএব তার বদলা নোয়াখালীতে নিতে হবে। অতএব আপনারা সংঘবদ্ধ হন, এবং হিন্দুদের বিরুদ্ধে উত্তেজক বক্তৃতার প্রতিযোগিতা আরম্ভ হয়ে গেল। এবং পরে মিটিং এর শেষে বলল যে দেশে মুসলিম লীগ সরকার আছে, হিন্দু মেয়েদেরকে রেপ করলে, ওদের বাড়ি লুট করলে বা যে কোনো রকমের অত্যাচার করলে কোনো রকমের শাস্তি হবে না। এইভাবে মিটিংটা আমি অ্যাটেন্ড করেছিলাম। ধরুন এটা সেপ্টেম্বরের এই শেষের দিকে হবে। আমি কয়েকদিন নোয়াখালীতে ছিলাম, এরপর আমি ঢাকা ফিরে আসি। এরপরে
আমি অনুবাদটা করছি এখন। হ্যাঁ, অনুবাদটা করে দিচ্ছি আপনার। So this event is in the September end, as per his memory. There was a meeting organized by Ghulam Sarwar. So Ghulam Sarwar was can be said to be the mastermind of the Noakhali riots. So I'm quoting this from Tathagata Roy's book. This is my edition. I mean, this is extra information. So Mr. Ghulam Sarwar, I think he had lost an election or something like that. So to win back favors in the Muslim League ranks, so he essentially wanted to do something. And of course, in Calcutta, direct action day had happened. So there was the Muslim League people, they felt that not much was achieved because the Hindus had retaliated. So during that meeting, he said he said to the people that there is a Muslim League government in Bengal at that time. So since there is a Muslim League government and in Calcutta they had killed Muslims, so we will have to take revenge of that. And since there is a Muslim League government, the police will not take any action on you. So you can this is a bit gruesome, but you can rape the women, you can do anything with them, and basically nothing will happen with you. So Mr. Rabindranath ji had attended that meeting, and he heard these things first time. So he attended that meeting, and then he went back to Dhaka. এখন আপনি ঢাকা আবার ফিরে গেলেন, তারপরে বলুন।
আচ্ছা, ঢাকায় ফিরে আসার পরে আমি ঢাকাতে অ্যাজ ইউজুয়াল ছিলাম, কোনো রকমের ইয়ে নেই। তারপর ওখানে পরে কিছুদিন পরে খবর পাওয়া গেল যে নোয়াখালীতে লক্ষ্মী পুজোর রাত্রিবেলা সেখানে প্রচন্ডভাবে প্রায় 100 কিলোমিটার মানে 100 বর্গ কিলোমিটার ব্যাপী মুসলমানরা দাঙ্গা হাঙ্গামা আরম্ভ করে দিয়েছে এবং এইভাবে প্রচন্ডভাবে ইয়ে হয়েছে এবং কয়েকদিন আগ থেকেই রাস্তাঘাট সমস্ত কেটে টেলিগ্রাফের তার ইয়ে করে বাইরের জগৎ থেকে নোয়াখালীকে বিচ্ছিন্ন করে ব্যাপক হারে ওরা অত্যাচার আরম্ভ করতো এবং কলকাতার পেপারগুলোতে তো 8-10 দিন পরে খবর বেরোলো যে এইভাবে নোয়াখালীতে দাঙ্গা হচ্ছে এবং হিন্দুদের উপর প্রচন্ড অত্যাচার হচ্ছে। তখন
আমি অনুবাদটা করছি, ছোট অনুবাদটা করে দিচ্ছি। So while in Dhaka, he received the news that on the day of Kojagari Lakshmi Puja, so on the day of Kojagari Lakshmi Puja, which happens after Durga Puja in Bengal, on Kojagari Lakshmi Puja, about 100 square kilometers, the Muslims had conducted a pogrom, and huge number of Hindus were being killed and atrocities were being committed on them. This is the news that he had received while being in Dhaka. He heard that the roads were cut off, the telegraph lines were cut off, so basically there was no form of communication. And as per his memory, the news of the Noakhali riots appeared in the newspapers of Calcutta 8 to 10 days after the rioting had begun, after the pogroms, the genocide had begun. আপনি বলুন, 8-10 দিন পরে খবরটা এলো। বলুন।
এরপরে গান্ধীজি আপনার নভেম্বরের প্রায় 27 দিন পরে নোয়াখালীতে গেল এবং ঢাকা থেকে কিছু স্বেচ্ছাসেবক ঢাকায় যেতে আরম্ভ করলো, নোয়াখালী যেতে আরম্ভ করলো। আমি তো ঠিক করলাম যে আমি যাব। তখন আমি ঢাকার রামকৃষ্ণ মিশনে খুবই যেতাম। স্বামী জ্ঞানাত্মানন্দ মঠাধ্যক্ষ উনি আমাকে খুব স্নেহ করতেন এবং রোজই আমি মিশনে যেতাম। আমি যাওয়ার আগের দিন আমি মঠে গেলাম। মঠে যাওয়ার পরে স্বামী জ্ঞানাত্মানন্দকে বললাম যে মহারাজ আমি যাচ্ছি। তখন তিনি পূর্ববঙ্গের হিন্দু সমাজ সেই রাত্রে আর পড়ার সুযোগ পাই নাই। তারপর ট্রেন পরের দিন মানে 11টা 11:30 নাগাদ ঢাকা থেকে রওনা হয়ে পরের দিন সকালবেলা চৌমুহানি পৌঁছালাম। তো চৌমুহানিতে আমার ঢাকা থেকে কিছু লোক আমাদের বাড়িতে গিয়ে উঠলো নোয়াখালীর কালিকাপুর গ্রামে। উঠে পরে আমরা সেই বই নিয়ে আমরা ইয়েতে গেলাম বিভিন্ন এফেক্টেড এরিয়াতে, 1 হাঁটু জল কাদা ভেঙে দেখি যে সমস্ত হিন্দুরা সব হাজার হাজার হিন্দু সমস্ত মুসলমান হয়ে বসে আছে, মাথায় টুপি, আপনার পরনে লুঙ্গি এবং তাদের মানে যারা হিন্দু ছিল তাদের আর মেয়েগুলো চোখগুলো সমস্ত লাল হয়ে বসে আছে। তখন আমরা ওদেরকে বললাম যে দেখুন আপনারা তো এখানে থাকতে পারেন, আপনাদের সাথে আমাদের সাথে চলে আসুন, আপনাদেরকে উদ্ধার করে আমরা নিয়ে যাব। তখন ওরা আমাদেরকে বললো যে বাবু আমরা তো মুসলমান হয়ে গেছি, আমাদেরকে গোমাংস মুখে দিয়েছে এবং আমাদের মেয়েদেরকে সব ধর্ষণ করেছে, ওরা বিয়ে করে নিয়েছে, তাহলে তো আমরা দুদিকই হারাবো, আমরা সমাজচ্যুত হয়ে গেছি। কারণ তখনকার দিনে নোয়াখালীতে হিন্দুরা, নোয়াখালী কেন সমস্ত এতে হিন্দুরা অত্যন্ত গোড়া ছিল এবং প্রায় 1 লক্ষ হিন্দুকে ওরা মুসলমান করে ফেলেছে এবং মুসলমানরা ভাবতো যে এইভাবে যদি কনভার্ট করে দেয় এরা কোনোদিনই হিন্দু হবে না।
আমি অনুবাদটা করছি।
করুন।
আমি অনুবাদটা করছি। তো আপনার কিছু ভয়েসটা কেটে গেছিল, আমি আপনাকে জিজ্ঞেস করব, ঠিক আছে? তো so Gandhi, as per his memory, came 27 days after the riots, so after the pogroms, and Gandhi was about to go to Noakhali. So he had got this, Mr. Rabindranath ji got this information, and he decided that he, along with a few other volunteers, will also go to Noakhali. So he went to Ramakrishna Mission Dhaka. Mr. Rabindranath ji went to Ramakrishna Mission Dhaka. He used to regularly attend, he used to regularly visit over there, and there was a Swamiji over there, Swami Gyanatmananda ji. So Swami Gyanatmananda ji had given him a book. The book is called Purbabongo o
Hindu Samaj.
The book was called Purbabongo o Hindu Samaj. তো আপনি এই বইটা রামকৃষ্ণ মিশন দ্বারা লেখা না?
হ্যাঁ, স্বামী মাধবানন্দ জেনারেল সেক্রেটারি বইটা ইয়ে করছে। তাতে সমস্ত পূর্ব মানে ভারতের সমস্ত মানে হিন্দু যারা ধর্ম,
কি নাম বলেন স্বামী কি নাম বলেন? মাধবানন্দ। আর শ্যামাপ্রসাদ মুখার্জি কিছু রোল প্লে করেছিলেন এখানে?
হ্যাঁ, এইটা একটু শুনুন না, এরপরে আমি পরে বলছি যে আমি যখন 50 ঢাকা থেকে 8 দিন ছিলাম।
একটু দাঁড়ান, আমি একটু দাঁড়ান, আমি অনুবাদটা শেষ করে নিচ্ছি। ওকে, সো that book he said was I think printed or the popularized by Swami Madhavananda ji of Ramakrishna
মাধবানন্দ।
Mission. Yeah, of Ramakrishna Mission, and that book contained statements of various dharma gurus within the fold of Hinduism, of different sampradayas, of different things, and they all said in unison that those who were forcefully converted, those who were forcefully married off, women who were violated, who were forcefully fed the meat of the cow, they could come back to the Hindu fold without the need of any prayaschitta, without the need of any penance for that. So he had grabbed a copy of that book and he went to Noakhali, and he saw, while going to Noakhali, he saw thousands of Hindus on, like, the villages that was Hindu earlier. The thousands and thousands of Hindus, they had become Muslims. They were all wearing the skull cap, they were all wearing lungi, and particularly he saw women. All the women's eyes were red. The women's eyes had become red. So he went and talked to the people and told that we have come to save you. Please come back. Please come back along with us. So he says at that time, society was very different. So the people who were converted, they feared. They feared because they feared of the Hindu society shunning them away, because they had been forcefully converted, they had been violated, they had been force-fed beef, which is one of the biggest sacrilege in Hinduism. He said that, but then and even women who were also forcefully married, even they were not willing to come back, because society at that time was very different. The women thought they had to stay with the husbands to which they had been forcefully married or raped. So he then carried that book and showed that all the dharma gurus of all the different sampradayas, no matter whichever sampradaya you were, you could come. They all said in unison that you could come back to Hinduism, and there was no need to do any penance for that. তারপর বলুন, আপনি যখন বইটা সবাইকে দেখিয়েছেন, তারপর
সেই বইটা দেখে অন্যান্য ভলান্টিয়াররা এই প্রথম দিনের বইটা ছিঁড়ে নিয়ে গিয়ে এক এক পেজ করে নিয়ে সমস্ত ক্যাম্পে দেখালো। তখন হিন্দুরা বেরিয়ে এলো এবং এই সংবাদ সুচেতা কৃপালনির কাছে গিয়েছিল যে একটা বই এসছে, যাতে সমস্ত ধর্মগুরুরা ভার্ডিক্ট দিয়েছে যে যেসব হিন্দুরা মুসলমান হচ্ছে তারা বিনা প্রায়শ্চিত্তে এবং বিনা বাধায় ধর্মে ফিরে আসবে। তারপর আমার এক পিসিমা উষারানী গুহরায়, উনি হিন্দু সুচেতা কৃপালনির নারী উদ্ধার ইয়েতে জয়েন করে। আমিও সুচেতা কৃপালনির সাথে আমার জানাশোনা হয় এবং উনি আমাকে জড়িয়ে ধরে বললো যে রবি, তুই কি করেছিস, এই বইটা এনেছিস, একটা দারুণ কাজ হয়েছে। পরের দিন আমি গিয়ে সুচেতা কৃপালনির হাতে একটা বই দিলাম।
আপনাকে কি সুচেতা কৃপালনি জি আপনাকে জড়িয়ে ধরেছিলেন, না আপনার পিসি জড়িয়ে ধরেছিলেন?
না, আমার সুচেতা কৃপালনি।
ঠিক আছে।
আমি আমার কাছ থেকে পেয়ে, কারণ এই বইটা যদি প্রিন্ট না হতো এবং এই বইটা যদি আমি ঢাকা থেকে না নিয়ে যেতাম, তাহলে হিন্দুরা বেরিয়ে আসতো না যে মুসলমানদের হাত থেকে।
ঠিক আছে, আমি
মুসলমান হয়ে গেছে, অতএব ওদেরকে
আমি অনুবাদটা করে দিচ্ছি। So Mr. Rabindranath ji took that book and went to the villages, and he showed the people that you could come back to the Hindu fold, like all the dharma gurus said in unison. There was no need for any difficult penance or anything. You were Hindu. So the volunteers that had accompanied Mr. Rabindranath ji, they were so elated to see that book that they tore one page each individually from that book, and because each page had a verdict of one dharma guru. So each of them, they went to different places and they showed to the Hindus who were forcefully converted that, see, your dharma gurus have said that you can come back to the Hindu fold. There is no need, you don't need to worry, you are accepted within the Hindu fold. And this was so popular that the news spread like wildfire, and Sucheta Kripalani ji, she was a active a member of Congress at that time, and I think she had come to provide relief. She heard that news, and she had a committee for the protection of women, self-protection of women, and Mr. Rabindranath ji's Pishi happens to be father's sister, was also a member of that. So Sucheta Kripalani ji got hold of this news, and she saw Mr. Rabindranath ji. Yeah, she embraced him and mentioned, like, you have done such a wonderful thing that because of this book we are able to bring back so many Hindus who were forcefully converted back within the Hindu fold. This book was such a rousing success. হ্যাঁ, বলুন আপনি।
আচ্ছা, এরপরে আমরা সেই বইটা তো প্রচার হলো এবং তাতে হিন্দুরা বুঝে গেল, ওই ছাপার অক্ষরে বই দেখে তারা বিশ্বাস করলো যে তারা হিন্দু ধর্মে ফিরে আসতে পারবে, তাদেরকে আর কেউ বাধা দেবে না। এভাবে আমরা ঘুরতে আরম্ভ করলাম গ্রামগুলোতে। গিয়ে দেখলাম যে কি বিভৎস অত্যাচার আপনি কল্পনা করতে পারবেন না। মানে বাড়িগুলোকে মানে আক্রমণ করে পুরুষদেরকে হাত পা বেঁধে তার দিয়ে বেঁধে জ্বলন্ত আগুনে নিক্ষেপ করেছে। তার পাশেই মুসলমানরা সব মহিলাদেরকে ধর্ষণ করতে আরম্ভ করেছে এবং বাচ্চাদেরকে খড়ের গাদার উপরে, যেসব মানে গরুকে খাওয়ানোর জন্য খড় মানে স্ট্যাক করে রাখে, তার উপর উঠিয়ে চারধারে আগুন দিয়ে দিয়েছে। যখন দাউ দাউ করে খড়ের গাদাগুলো জ্বলে উঠছে, বাচ্চারা নিচে গড়িয়ে পড়েছে, তাদেরকে পা ধরে পুকুরে ছুঁড়ে ফেলে দিয়েছে। মানুষ প্রাণের ভয়ে পুকুরে ঝাঁপ দিয়েছে, তাদেরকে বর্ষা, কোঁচ, ট্যাঁড়া এসব দিয়ে মানে আঘাত করেছে এবং তাদের বডিতে ওইসব অস্ত্রগুলো গাঁথা ছিল এবং কাক চিল ওখানে বসে ওদের মাংস খেয়েছে এবং ওই হ্যান্ডেলের উপরে বসে বসে বিশ্রাম করছিল। এইসব আমরা দেখতে পেলাম। এবং
আমি অনুবাদটা করছি,
আরেকটু বলে দিচ্ছি
অনুবাদটা। আচ্ছা বলুন। না মানে আমার মনে থাকবে না, একটু বলতে থাকুন।
হ্যাঁ বলুন।
হ্যাঁ, তো then visited villages to see what had actually happened, to hear the witnesses of the victims. The victims had said that men had their hands and feet tied with wire, and then they were burnt. যে পুরুষদেরকে হাত পা বেঁধে পুড়িয়ে দিয়েছিল না?
হাত পা বেঁধে, তার দিয়ে হাত পা বেঁধে জ্যান্ত পুড়িয়ে মারছে আর বাঁশ দিয়ে চেপে ধরে ধরে পোড়াচ্ছে, আর তার সাথে তার পাশে ওদের স্ত্রী এবং মেয়েদেরকে ধর্ষণ করছে দিনের বেলা।
So the it was in the morning. The men, their hands and feet were tied and they were burnt alive. They were burnt alive, beaten with bamboo sticks. And when that was happening, the Muslims were raping their that man's wife or daughter or sister, etc. This was being done, and children were thrown into like cow feed, like some straw or something is fed to the cows, so that was set into fire and children were thrown into that. Some of the children, হ্যাঁ, কিছু কিছু বাচ্চা যারা আগুন থেকে বের হয়ে গেছে ওদেরকে জলে ফেলেছে না,
পা ধরে পুকুরে ছুঁড়ে ফেলে দিয়েছে।
আচ্ছা, some of the children who managed to flee or from the fire pit, they were grabbed on their legs and then thrown into lakes, thrown into ponds, and there were many dead bodies lying. Some bodies even had weapons still inserted on them, and those were being eaten by dogs, those were being eaten by crows, those were being eaten by other animals who feed on dead carcasses. হ্যাঁ বলুন।
আচ্ছা, এইভাবে ঘুরতে ঘুরতে আমরা সমস্ত বাড়িতে গেলাম। 11 আপনার অক্টোবর ওরা রাজেন্দ্রলাল রায়চৌধুরীর বাড়ি আক্রমণ করলো। রাজেন্দ্রলাল রায়চৌধুরী ছিল আপনার হিন্দু মহাসভার প্রেসিডেন্ট ওখানকার নোয়াখালীর। গোলাম সারোয়ারের নেতৃত্বে প্রায় 10-12 হাজার মুসলমান তার বাড়ি আক্রমণ করলো এবং মানে বাড়িটা ঘেরাও করে কাঠের দরজার মধ্যে আগুন ধরিয়ে দিল। তখন যখন দরজা পুড়ে ছাই হলো, তখন মুসলমানরা ওই উপর থেকে, ছাদের উপর থেকে মানে 20-21 জন ইয়েকে ধরে নিয়ে এসে নিচের তলায় আপনার এক ঘরে আটক করলো, আর রাজেন্দ্রলাল রায়কে হত্যা করার জন্য ধরে নিয়ে যাচ্ছিল ইয়েতে একটা নারকেল বাগানের দিকে। তখন তার ছেলে গোপাল বুঝতে পেরে মানে বাবা বাবা করে ওর পিছনে যাচ্ছিল, তখন বল্লম দিয়ে তার বুক এফোড় ওফোড় করে দিল মুসলমানরা। এরপরে আপনার ওই রাজেন্দ্রলাল বাড়ির গ্রাউন্ড ফ্লোরে প্রায় 20-21 জন মেম্বারকে সমস্ত উলঙ্গ করে, পুরুষ মহিলাদেরকে ধুতি দিয়ে এবং শাড়ি দিয়ে হাত পা বেঁধে দাও দিয়ে বর্ষা দিয়ে কুপিয়ে হত্যা করেছে। এবং
বলছি অনুবাদটা করে দিচ্ছি। So on 11th October he Rajendralal Roy Chaudhary, he was a political worker of Hindu Mahasabha.
Yes.
He Hindu Mahasabha president, that's what he said. 10 to 12,000 Muslims had come to attack his house. So his house, wooden doors were burned. So some of the members, they climbed to the top floors for safety somewhere below. Then about 20 to 21 members of the his son, I think Gopal bolechen na onar chheler naam Gopal. তো গোপাল, when he saw that the mobs were arriving, so he screamed father father and he was running to find his father. তারপর কি হলো গোপালের? তারপর
গোপালকে একদম বর্ষা দিয়ে বুকের মধ্যে এমন জোরে মারলো যে এফোড় এফোড় হয়ে গোপাল মারা গেল। এবং বর্ষা বলতে কি মাছ ধরার জিনিস? না না, ওইটা ওই মানে একটা মানুষকে চোর ডাকাতি হলে ওই এক ফলার ইয়ে থাকে।
আচ্ছা, সেটা কি দাঁড় মতো? সেটা কি দাঁড় মতো?
দাওয়ার মতো নয়, এটা বাঁশের ইয়ের সাথে ওই ইয়েতে থাকে বর্ষা। আপনার হ্যাঁ,
আচ্ছা হবে তাতে
যুদ্ধের সময় বর্ষা।
আচ্ছা হবে 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 সো Gopal, when he was screaming father father, so the mob attacked him with a weapon called a borsha. So as per his description, borsha is a bamboo with I think certain attachment is over there. So he was hit on his chest and he died on the spot.
আচ্ছা, তারপর
The
গোপাল
20 to
রাজেন্দ্র
21
রাজ,
yeah, the 20 to 21 members of the family, they were their dhotis, their saris were opened, their hands and feet were tied, and then they were also beaten with different weapons, and they died.
আচ্ছা, এবং রাজেন্দ্রলাল রায়চৌধুরীকে এক কোপে মাথাটা কেটে ফেলে কিছুক্ষণ ফুটবল খেললো, এবং তারপর একটা রূপোর থালাতে করে গোলাম সারোয়ারকে রাজেন্দ্রলাল রায়চৌধুরীর মাথাটাকে প্রেজেন্ট করলো ওই দাঙ্গাকারীরা। এই হলো করপাড়া রায়চৌধুরী বাড়ির ঘটনা।
ঠিক আছে,
এবং এরপরে
আর আপনি আপনি কি বলেন, আর এমনি এই যে কি কি মানে সব মিলে কি কি হয়েছিল, এই যে মহিলাদের কিরকম সিঁদুর, এই ঘটনাটা বলে দিবেন, ঠিক আছে? আমি অনুবাদটা করে দিচ্ছি এটা। ওকে, সো আই এম ট্রান্সলেটিং হোয়াট হি সেড। Mr. Rajendralal Chaudhary's head was then severed, chopped off, and the mob played football with his severed head, and then that head was brought on a plate to Ghulam Sarwar. হ্যাঁ, বাকিটা বলুন।
আচ্ছা, এরপরে যখন গান্ধীজি সে বাড়িতে গেল, গিয়ে দেখে যে নিচের তলার ঘরে রক্ত প্রায় 1.5 ইঞ্চি পুরো আমসত্তার মতো হয়ে রক্ত পড়ে আছে, বাড়ির ওয়ালের মধ্যেও সমস্ত রক্ত, ছাদের মধ্যে পর্যন্ত রক্ত, মানে 21 জন 22 জন লোককে এভাবে মুসলিম লীগ হত্যা করেছে। এবং এছাড়া ধরুন আমার একটা আছে রক্তাক্ত নোয়াখালীর দিনগুলো, একটা আর্টিকেল বেরিয়েছে, সেটাও যদি আপনারা দেখেন, তাতে বিভিন্ন বাড়িতে কিভাবে হয়েছে এবং এদের অত্যাচারের হাত থেকে রক্ষা পাওয়ার জন্য আপনার শায়েস্তানগরের চিত্তদত্ত নিজের পরিবারের সব লোককে গুলি করে নিজে সুইসাইড করে, বুলেট না থাকাতে তিনি, তার ওয়াইফ এবং একটা ছেলে বেঁচে যায়। এবং গোপাইবাগ দাসদের বাড়িতে একই দিনে 22 জন ভদ্রমহিলা বিধবা হয়। এবং
আমি বলছি, আমি অনুবাদটা করছি, মনে রাখতে পারছিলাম না। তা আপনি বললেন গান্ধী এসেছিল, তারপর এই রাজেন্দ্রলাল চৌধুরী বাড়িতে এসেছিল, তারপর
রাজেন্দ্রলাল বাড়িতে এসে ওই ঘরে ঢুকে দেখে যে ফ্লোরের মধ্যে রক্ত ঠিক আমসত্তর মতো শুকিয়ে পড়ে আছে, কালো রক্ত প্রায় 1.5 ইঞ্চি পুরো।
Okay. So when Gandhi visited the house of Rajendralal Roy Chaudhary, the entire floor was soaked in blood that had dried up and had become like jelly. So he is describing it as amshotto. Amshotto is a in Hindi I think it's called aam papad. So you make a jelly out of a mango pulp. So the entire floor, the black blood, the blood was extremely dark and it had become like a jelly. That's how he describes that. তারপর
এইভাবে, এবং সেই দিনই সন্ধ্যাবেলা প্রায় 22 জন লোকের আপনার এই কঙ্কালগুলো সমস্ত নিকটবর্তী একটা জায়গা থেকে উদ্ধার করে এনে ডক্টর সুশীলা নায়ার ওদের ডেড বডির ডেথ সার্টিফিকেট দেয় এবং রাত্রে সেখানে এগুলো দাহ করা হয়।
Okay. So then then the people find 22 skeletons. কঙ্কাল কি ডেড বডি?
হ্যাঁ, ডেড বডির কঙ্কাল গুলো আর কি, যেগুলোকে হত্যা করা হয়েছিল।
আচ্ছা,
এক জায়গায় জড়ো করা ছিল।
So they found 22 skeletons of people nearby the area, and before that he had mentioned in one particular family I think 20 or 21 women's husbands were killed. আপনি বলেছিলেন না যে 20-21টা মহিলাদের বিধবা হয়ে গেছিল, সেটা কোন বাড়িতে হয়েছিল?
সেটা হলো আপনার ওই গোপাইবাগ দাসদের বাড়িতে।
So Gopai Bag Das, in his family, 20 to 21 women have become widowed, and he has written an article, Roktakto Noakhalir Dingulo. In this article, he mentions many events. So since I have read this article, I mention one event. The Muslims they caught hold of the women and they rubbed the women's sindurs with their toe of the foot. So they pulled the women down on the floor. They rubbed their sindur off with the toes of their foot, the big finger of their foot. This is his description.
এবং আমার হিসাব মতো অন্তত 150 থেকে 200 মহিলা আসন্ন প্রসবা মহিলারা গর্ভপাত হয়ে গেছে ভয়ে, এবং ব্লিডিং হতে হতে ওরা মৃত্যু মুখে পতিত হয়েছে। এইসব অত্যাচার ওরা মুসলিম লীগ করেছে একটা পুরো ডিস্ট্রিক্ট ব্যাপী। এবং সেই একটা ইনকোয়ারি কমিশন গভর্নমেন্ট করেছিল নোয়াখালীর জন্য, রঞ্জিত গুপ্ত ICS এবং ত্রিপুরার জন্য এডওয়ার্ড স্কিপার সিমসন নোয়াখালীর যে রিপোর্টটা রঞ্জিত
না, না,
রিপোর্ট তৈরি করেছিল
আপনি
সেটা
আপনি একবার
ডক্টর
আপনি আপনি আবার বলুন, আমি একটু ভুলে গেছি, আবার বলুন তো, আমি
আচ্ছা
আবার বলুন তো।
এইসব অত্যাচারের রিপোর্ট প্রায় ধরুন আমার হিসাব মতো 150 থেকে প্রায় 200 মহিলার গর্ভপাত হয়ে গেছে, যারা আসন্ন প্রসবা, যারা ভয়ে আর কি
হ্যাঁ,
ব্লিডিং হয়েছে এবং তারা সেটা মৃত্যু মুখে পতিত হয়েছে বিনা চিকিৎসায়।
এই
তারপর
আচ্ছা,
গান্ধী যখন নোয়াখালীর একটা বাড়িতে গিয়েছে, তখন সেখানে একটা কুকুর আপনার গিয়ে গান্ধীর পায়ের পাশে পড়ে গড়াগড়ি আরম্ভ করে। তখন লোকেরা বুঝতে পারছে না কি ব্যাপার। তখন সোমনাথ চ্যাটার্জির বাবা নির্মল চ্যাটার্জির ধুতিকে কুকুরটা কামড়ে ধরে টানতে টানতে একটা জায়গায় নিয়ে যায়। সেখানে গিয়ে দেখে যে একটা নূতন গর্ত এবং মাটি দিয়ে। তখন সেই খবর পেয়ে সব লোকদের কাছে খবর নিয়ে জানা গেল যে এখানে মানুষদেরকে জ্যান্ত কবর দেওয়া হয়েছে, যাদেরকে
ওকে,
হত্যা
বলছি
করা
বলছি
হয়েছে।
আমি অনুবাদটা করছি। সো দেন হি রিমেম্বার্স seeing or hearing about 150 to 200 women who bled to death. Then a dog came near Gandhi and that Gandhi's foot, and the dog started rolling around and playing nearby. So they thought, why was the dog doing that? And কুকুরটা কার ছিল বললেন?
কুকুরটা এক ভদ্রলোক, সে তার নামটাও আমি জানি, সেটা ভুলে গেছি। পরে সেই কুকুরটাকে নির্মল চ্যাটার্জি কলকাতায় নিয়ে এসে তার বাড়িতে মানে শেষ দিন অবধি, তার মৃত্যু অবধি
ঠিক আছে, বলছি
সহকারে
okay,
রেখে দিয়েছিল।
so on that spot, yeah, so that dog later, that dog directed people to a particular spot. So the dog came near Gandhi and they directed people to a particular spot, and that spot they saw that it was a grave where Hindus were buried alive. They were buried alive in that grave. আর ওখানে সবাই মৃত ছিল না?
পরে খুঁড়ে ওই মৃত ডেড বডি গুলো উঠালো আর কি।
Okay, and all the bodies were dead in that grave. Nobody survived. And father and Nirmal Chatterjee, Nirmal Chatterjee,
father of Somnath Chatterjee.
Okay, so Nirmal Chatterjee Hindu Mahasabha ছিলেন না?
হ্যাঁ, হিন্দু মহাসভা।
So Nirmal Chatterjee was a Hindu Mahasabha politician, and he was the father of Communist Party politician Somnath Chatterjee. So Nirmal Chatterjee, yeah, he took that dog from Noakhali and kept it as his personal pet in Kolkata. হ্যাঁ,
কলকাতা নিয়ে আসে। এবং কি ধরনের অত্যাচার করেছে সেসব এখন আমার এই পর্যন্ত প্রায় 10-11খানা বই আছে দেশভাগের উপরে, অধিকাংশই বাংলা। তবে একটা বই হিন্দিতে ট্রান্সলেট হয়েছে, দ্বিখণ্ডিত মাতা ধর্ষিতা ভগিনী। এই হলো নোয়াখালীর অত্যাচার করেছে আজও। কিন্তু দুঃখের ব্যাপার যে আমাদের নোয়াখালী সম্মেলনী আছে, কিন্তু ওরা কোনো মিটিং বা ইয়েতে এইসব অত্যাচারের কথা কোনোদিন ইয়ে করে না। এরা সব সিকুলার। এটাই শান্তনু সিংহ ব্যাপক হারে ইয়ে করেছে।
ঠিক আছে, আমি অনুবাদটা করছি। সো হি দেন মেনশনস, আপনি 10-12টা কি বললেন বই? হ্যাঁ, he has personally, Mr. Rabindranath ji has personally written 10 to 12 books covering the subject of Noakhali, his own experiences and various other events, partition, etc. So among them, Vikhandita Mata Dharshita Bhogini. This book has been translated to Hindi. So he is mentioning about that book, and he says that even though there are Noakhali Sammilanis that are organized কলকাতায় নাকি পশ্চিমবঙ্গ সম্পূর্ণ?
কলকাতায় ওদের একটা সংস্থা আছে প্রায় 125 বছরের পুরানো, কিন্তু তারা বছরে মিটিং করে।
In Calcutta there is a বলছি, in Calcutta there is a 125-year-old samstha, that is a committee called Noakhali Sammilani, and he says that they meet every year, but these events are seldom, or rather not discussed. These events are not discussed as per him, and they are unfortunately secular as per Mr. Rabindranath ji.
Yes.
ঠিক আছে। এটা আরো কিছু বলতে চাইবেন না? আপনার সম্পূর্ণটা বলা হয়ে গেছে।
আরো কিছু বলতে চাইছি যে দেশভাগ করে,
হ্যাঁ, যদি আপনি বলতে চান তাহলে আপনি বলতে পারেন।
হ্যাঁ, ব্যাপার হলো যে দেশভাগের উপরে ডক্টর দীনেশ চন্দ্র সিংহ একটা বই লিখেছে, গ্রেট ক্যালকাটা কিলিং এন্ড নোয়াখালী জেনোসাইড। এই বইটা খুবই ইম্পর্টেন্ট বই, এবং এই বইগুলো সম্বন্ধে আমার যে ধারণা যে এগুলো ব্যাপক হারে প্রচার করা দরকার। এবং এখন যেসব নেতারা দেশের হিন্দু মুসলিম ঐক্যের কথা বলছে, যে কোনোদিন হতে পারে না, এবং আপাত দৃষ্টিতে যদি এখনই আমরা ইয়ে না হই, তাহলে দেখবেন যে অদূর ভবিষ্যতে ভারতবর্ষ এক মুসলিম রাষ্ট্রে পরিণত হবে। কারণ যেভাবে ওরা সমস্ত দেশকে গ্রাস করার চেষ্টা করছে, তারা ইটালিয়ান দার্শনিক মেকিয়াভেলির একটা থিওরি হলো যে এখন দেশ দখল করে, মানে যুদ্ধ করে দেশ দখল করা যাবে না, অতএব লোক সংখ্যা বাড়ানো।
ইটালিয়ান কি বললেন? ইটালিয়ান
দার্শনিক মেকিয়াভেলি, তার একটা থিওরি
দার্শনিক
হলো,
দার্শনিক দার্শনিক বলতে ফিলোসফার না?
হ্যাঁ ফিলোসফার,
ঠিক আছে।
যে তার একটা থিওরি হলো যে বর্তমান যুগে কেউ যুদ্ধ করে তার দেশ দখল করতে পারবে না, অতএব করতে হলে জনসংখ্যা বাড়াতে হবে। অতএব মুসলমানরা যখন দেশভাগ হয় তখন 48-এর অনুসারে ভারতবর্ষে আর 9 কোটি মুসলমান ছিল। আজকে ভারত, বাংলাদেশ, পাকিস্তান মিলে তা ধরুন 70 কোটি মুসলমান, এবং কিছুদিন পর ওরাই চাইবে যে অখণ্ড ভারত হোক, কারণ তখন ওরা মেজরিটি হয়ে যাবে। আপনি ওয়েস্ট বেঙ্গলেই দেখুন না, যেভাবে মুসলিম মেজরিটি হয়েছে দেশে, ওয়েস্ট বেঙ্গলে যেভাবে মুসলমানদের সংখ্যা বৃদ্ধি হচ্ছে, অদূর ভবিষ্যতে পশ্চিমবঙ্গ একটা গ্রেটার বাংলাদেশের অন্তর্গত হয়ে যাবে, তাতে কোনো সন্দেহের অবকাশ নেই।
ঠিক আছে, আমি অনুবাদটা করেছি তাহলে। সো I asked him if he would want to say anything else apart from what he described in his life experience. He mentions that there is an author called Dr. Dinesh Chandra Singha. Dr. Dinesh Chandra Singha also is from Noakhali.
Yeah, Noakhali, he's my friend, আমার মানে পাশের গ্রামেরই লোক।
Okay, so he is the friend of Mr. Rabindranath ji, and his village was the nearby or rather the next village. So he has written a book, Great Calcutta 1946 Great Calcutta Killings and Noakhali Genocide. So he has read this book. It's a very informative book, and he wishes that this book is popularized among more people so that people get to know what happened. He then mentions a theory. Yeah, he then mentions he then says that he's worried about the future of India, and mentions a theory said by an Italian philosopher. The philosopher, okay, yeah, he mentions the name. So he mentions that the philosopher has quoted that if a community cannot take over a country by war, the next way they would do is by increasing their population. So he fears that a similar situation is happening in India, and he fears that he mentions the population of the Muslims before the partition, and now he says how if we combine the Indian subcontinent, the erstwhile map of India, he says that their population is increasing steadily, and Mr. Rabindranath ji fears that they would again want their version of Akhanda Bharat. So that is called Ghazwa-e-Hind. So it's a prophecy that that the Muslims will conquer India. So he fears about that happening, and he also personally fears for West Bengal, as there is a project called Greater Bangladesh Project. You must all be knowing that it was initially believed that Eastern Bengal, or the land was not sufficient enough. They would need more land for their resources and everything. So there is a plan called the Greater Bangladesh Plan. So he fears that West Bengal, if the current population things are taken into account, and the way how people are, he fears that West Bengal may unfortunately be a part of Greater Bangladesh if it happens. So this is what Mr. Rabindranath ji has concluded.
আচ্ছা,
হয়ে যাবে ধন্যবাদ।
So thank you so much, Rabindranath ji, for sharing such gruesome details. And I think anybody who has listened to this testimony can't but sympathize and empathize with what really happened and recognize these atrocities given to Hindus. So thank you so much, Soumyadeep, for translating so meticulously. And for those of you who do not know, Rabindranath ji is 91 years old, and he has gone through a lot of trouble to join this webinar. And he has, been able to tell us details about this particular genocide, which I think very few people can tell us today. He's one of the survivors of this genocide. And I'm really grateful to him, and also to the Stories of Bengali Hindus team, for helping him and translating this testimony of Rabindranath ji, and for making sure that he's here today. It's really important that we had his testimony, and that we were able to document it. So many people have been messaging me and asking me if his testimony will be available somewhere. So we will be uploading it to YouTube as well as to Facebook. We'll clip out different segments and we'll upload it. So we also have some other speakers today. I think there's another member from the Stories of Bengali Hindus
Yes,
team,
yes.
and also we have Raja Devnath ji, who is also a survivor and a part of the family of some of the victims who were persecuted. So, Soumyadeep, who else is
Yes,
joining from your team?
So my friend Mahua would also be speaking.
Okay.
So yeah, I would just wrap around the event. So there was another testimony that we received just a few days ago on Twitter. So I'll tell you about it briefly, and
Yes.
maybe Mahua would also be able to relate to her story. So she does not have relatives who might have faced Noakhali, but the parallels were also there in 1971, 1990, etc. So I think she would be very adept at explaining that. Just a moment. Yeah, so the story was heard by the younger uncle of the person who told the story. I'm keeping the names hidden for privacy purposes, but their testimony is available to us in an audio.
And I just wanted to, just 1 minute, I also wanted to add that I actually have the names of the people. He gave, the same person sent me a list of the names. And once we publish the testimony with his permission, I will publish it with all the names and other details.
Then okay, you can publish the names. I will keep it, since I don't remember.
You can read out whatever he said. Yes.
So after their family contains of two different branches. One branch stayed at Noakhali, another branch they stayed at Khilpada. So in Noakhali, 8 members of that person's family had died, and the one narrating the incident, he was 10 years old when the Noakhali genocide happened. So after 3 to 4 days of Lakshmi Puja, they got a news that Brajesh Thakur, his house was attacked. So he managed to flee. Fortunately, no deaths happened in that house as per what he knows. The incarceration happened at around 7 to 8 p.m. in the evening. The house was burned, and his village was his place of residence was a mile away from about Brajesh Thakur's house. So he ran away, and they were running away after getting the news that people would be attacking. Unfortunately, a portion of their family decided to stay back. 8 members, 7 of them were murdered, and one person who was staying at somebody else's house, he was caught, and he was, as per his definition, Jobai Kora. So Jobai Kora essentially means slitting the throat. So these were how the 8 members died, and they ran away, and a person named Elahia, he recalls, was chasing them. So his family members, they took about 4 to 5 boats, if I remember correctly, and they were traversing across the Khal. So I had described the geography of Noakhali, which translates to New Creek. So Khal is basically a creek. There were plenty of creeks over there, and they were heading over to Chomuhoni. So Chomuhoni is a major town, as I mentioned, and that's also how Mr. Rabindranath ji had went to his home, from Chomuhoni, and then take a boat to his village. So at Chomuhoni, they were about to go to Chomuhoni, but midway they saw Muslims carrying Ramdao. Ramdao is a large blade. So they were carrying Ramdaos, and they said that they would be killing them, and they were stranded in the middle of the Khal. So for one night, the boat was there in the Khal. They did not even move. And in the morning, they saw about thousands of Muslims. There were about 1,000 Muslims were over there, all carrying weapons, and they again saw Ilahia, that man. So Ilahia then jumped into the Khal and said that he would be finishing them. So once he jumped, the people, they all scattered. Fortunately for them, there was one friend of his, I think he was his brother, maybe, or maybe some relative, I can't recall at that point of time. He was friends with a particular Muslim, so he said that do not harm them. And there was another local Khalifa, Maulavi, but they were called Khalifa as per what he said. So the one Khalifa also tried to help them, but when Ilahia jumped into the water, nothing could be done. So they again fled back to their original place. So initially going to Chomuhoni, and later they were going back. So once they were heading back, they again were stopped by different people, and they were attacked with knives. So again over there was another Khalifa who stopped them and took them to his house for safety. But the mob that had gathered, they went to burn and destroy other houses and attack other people. So, but the Khalifa told that I cannot protect you for long. Please, you have to go. So they fled again, and they again went to a khal in the evening. Yeah, in the evening they hid their boats and they hid under water hyacinth. So in the geography of Bengal, since there are many water bodies, they often get covered with water hyacinths. So in many stories, victims used to hide under water hyacinths so that people cannot see them. This is also another testimony that has been given to me by an acquaintance of mine. He is my age. He heard it through his father. So his story is basically they were all the men and women, they were fleeing after Noakhali, and the women had to give their gold ornaments to everyone to please let them flee to India. They were a bit fortunate since they were rich, and maybe the gold ornaments saved them. But when they reached India, they just had 1 rupee, and they too had to hide under the water hyacinth, which is called kochuripana. So I go back to the original testimony. So yeah, the women were hiding. The men were hiding underwater. Hiding underwater hyacinth, and the women were staying in that night for the men were hiding for 2 days without food, without water, underwater hyacinths. That's how they spent. And they then got to know that in Khilpada, where they had other relatives, the military would come to and ensure that no rioting or no pogrom takes place. So they decided to go to Khilpada, and they got news that Khilpada Chaudhary Badi would be attacked. So they feared that. So they, I think I remember him saying that the attack did not happen, but they later went to Netrokona, which is in Mymensingh district. They stayed over there, and after that they migrated to India. So that's the other story.
Okay, thank you so much. So I wanted to check if Raja Devnath ji is here. He also wanted to share his testimony. So Raja Devnath ji, are you here? Can you unmute yourself?
Yes, ma'am, I am here.
Okay. So can you, are you able to turn on your...
Yes, I have turned my video on.
Yes. Okay, just 1 minute. So yes, Raja Devnath, can you share your story in, I don't know, we are running out of time. So maybe in 5-10 minutes, if you can give us a short summary of what your family went through in the Noakhali genocide. So fortunately, we had a lot of speakers today for sharing the testimony of the victims. That's a good thing, because I was not sure if everybody will be able to join. But I won't waste more time. I'll let you speak. Please go ahead.
First of all, I bid my namaskar to all of you, respected Shantanuda and Rabindranath Datta. I personally know them, and they have said everything. But I want to include some 2 or 3 facts. First of all, why Noakhali is happened? Why Noakhali has happened? Actually, in there, Noakhali, 82% population of total population was Muslim, and only 18% were the Hindus. And this was the main cause for why they have been attacked by them. And number 2, in Noakhali, everything, Rabindranath Datta ji has told everything. And what actually एक्चुअली हम हिंदी में बात कर रहे हैं थोड़ा हिंदी
हाँ,
में
प्लीज आप हिंदी में बात कर सकते हैं।
एक्चुअली रविन्द्रनाथ दत्त जी ने सब बोल दिया है। तो मेरा जो फैमिली था वो भाटियालपुर का रहने वाला था। भाटियालपुर इज साउथ वेस्टर्न ऑफ कोरपाड़ा, ज्यादा दूर नहीं है। तो वो लोग बात क्या है, एक कारण था कि वो लोग हिंदू महासभा नहीं करते, वो लोग कांग्रेस का सपोर्टर। फिर भी उन लोग का ऊपर ये हुआ कि माने उन लोग बोला कि हम लोग का दीन मानना पड़ेगा। मुस्लिम लोग उन लोगों को बोला कि आप लोग बात जाओगे, एक ही शर्त है, आपको दीन मानना पड़ेगा, हमारा जो दीन है दीन मानना पड़ेगा, आपको धोती ये सब नहीं पहनना सकोगे, उनको लुंगी पहनना पड़ेगा, टोपी पहनना पड़ेगा और कलमा पढ़ के मुसलमान बनना पड़ेगा। तो वो क्या करेगा उस टाइम। और एक चीज है, नोआखली में ज्यादा से ज्यादा तो खाल बिल है, क्रीक है, जो उन्होंने बताया, पूरा एकदम चारी तरफ घिरा हुआ है। भागने का कोई जगह नहीं है। और वो इस टाइम को ऐसे इसलिए सिलेक्ट किया कि इस टाइम हर बड़ा बड़ा जमींदार फैमिली था और उन लोगों का सब कलकत्ता में और बाहर में काम करते थे। वो लोग घर में इस टाइम में आते थे, तो सब आ गया। दुर्गा पूजा का टाइम में सब घुस गया अंदर में। दुर्गा पूजा का बाद लक्ष्मी पूजा आता है, तो सब आ गया। अभी टोटल इन माने एरिया वाज सराउंडेड बाय द मुस्लिम्स एंड टोटल जो माझी माल्ला जो लोग बोट चलाते हैं वो लोग सब मुस्लिम हैं, वो लोग सब मुस्लिम लीग का भी है। तो वो लोग क्या किया, पूरा मतलब जो जाने आने का सब रास्ता बंद था।
घेराव, इसको जैसे हिंदी में हम लोग घेराव बोलते हैं कि पूरा
हाँ,
घेर लिया सब तरफ से।
हाँ घेर लिया, क्योंकि वो लोग अंदर में आ चुका है, लेकिन बाहर जाएंगे कैसे? जाएगा तो नाव में जाना पड़ेगा, तो नाव लाएगा कौन?
नाव
वो तो
मुस्लिम
सब
की है तो
हाँ,
यस।
तो वो बाहर जाने का कोई उन लोग का रास्ता नहीं।
Just 1 minute, I'll translate in English. So what he's saying is that the only way out of those villages was through the boats, but all the boats were owned by the Muslims. So there was no way for the Hindu families to escape, because the only escape was through the river, and the boats belonged to the Muslims who would not take them. बोलिए।
तो अभी क्या हुआ, उन लोग का शर्त दिया गया कि आप लोग को मुस्लिम बनना पड़ेगा। तो जैसे कि उन लोग का हर एक एक इमाम आया, मस्जिद का एक इमाम आया, एक बड़ा जो हॉल रूम है जहाँ पे उन लोग का दुर्गा पूजा होता था, वहीं पे सब लोग को बिठाया। अंदर में एक तो माने बीच में एक तो कर्टेन पर्दा जो है वो दिया, क्योंकि जनाना लोग एक साइड बैठेगा और पुरुष लोग एक साइड बैठेगा। तो पर्दा देख के वो लोग वहां पर कलेमा जो है ला इलाहा इल्लल्लाह मोहम्मद रसूलुल्लाह इसे पाठ उन लोग को पढ़ाया। और हर जो ये है उन लोग का नाम चेंज कर दिया। मेरा माता जो मैटरनल अंकल था उनका भी नाम चेंज हो गया उस टाइम का जी। तो हर सबको नाम चेंज किया, हर को मुसलमान बनाया। और आफ्टर ऑल आफ्टर दैट इंसिडेंट I have come through the book written by Professor Nirmal Kumar Bosu, who was accompanied to Gandhiji at the time of Noakhali days. He wrote a book, Satcholisher Diary, Diary of 1947. तो उसमें देखा कि मेरा जो भाटियालपुर जो जिस गांव में हमारा जमींदारी था, उस गांव में गांधी जी 14 जनवरी 1947 में गया, ठीक है। और एक दिन वहां रहा, और वो जो है उसमें वो लोग उस पेज में लिखा हुआ है कि हमारा जो फोर फादर्स थे वो 4 महीने के लिए वो लोग वहां पर मुस्लिम बन के रहा। और गांधी जी जाके वो जो राधा कृष्ण जी का जो ये है कैलेंडर है उसको ये करके फिर उन लोग को हिंदू बनाया। मतलब हिंदू बनाया मतलब पूजा पाठ स्टार्ट कर दिया और वो लोग हिंदू बन गया, ऐसा कुछ हुआ है ज्यादा से ज्यादा। वो उस किताब में लिखा हुआ है 1940 written by Professor Nirmal Kumar Bose, anthropologist from Calcutta University at the time of Gandhi जी। तो ये हमने देखा है, माने मतलब ये तो सच है कि जहां जहां हमारा डेमोग्राफी इज द डेस्टिनी। बेसिकली डेमोग्राफी हमारा जहां जहां खतरे में जाएगा, हम लोग ऐसे ऐसे वहां पे कश्मीर जैसे हुआ और नोआखाली जैसे हुआ, ये हर देश में होने वाला है, इसके रोकने वाला कोई नहीं है। और दिस इज आवर फ्यूचर, एंड इफ वी वांट टू प्रोटेक्ट इट और वांट टू फाइट बैक अगेंस्ट इट, देन वी हैव टू नो कुरान एंड हदीस केयरफुली एंड take footsteps very seriously for survive in the future.
Okay, thank you, Raja ji. आपकी बहुत, I'm very grateful for you coming here and sharing testimony of your family. And some people have been messaging me, so I will share this, and hopefully we'll have a transcript also of this for anybody who wants. It will be uploaded on YouTube. Now I'll want to invite Priya Saha ji. Priya ji, are you there? So namaste, Raja ji. Thank you so much for joining us.
Namaste.
Yes.
Namaste.
Just 1 minute, I'm adding you. So, Namaste Priya ji. So, for those of you who don't know, Priya ji is an activist who speaks up for the human rights of Bangladeshi Hindus, and she wants to share something today about the Hindus who were persecuted in the Noakhali genocide.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk and to remember this innocent victim. I'm remembering with great sorrow of all innocent murdered, raped, and forcefully converted people, forcefully converted Islam in Noakhali in this day in 1946. It is estimated that over 5,000 Hindu were killed, hundreds of Hindu women were raped, and thousands of Hindu men and women are forcefully converted to Islam. Around 50 to 75,000 survivors were sheltered in temporary relief camp in Kumilla, Chatpur, and Agartala place. Affected area were Ramganj, Begumganj, Rajpur, Lokhipur, Sagolnaya, Sondip police station under Noakhali district, and under Hajiganj, Faridganj, and Chatpur, and Laksham, Choddogram police station in Tripura district. A total of more than it's a 20 square kilometer massacre which started on 10 October and the day of Lokhi Puja. You know, the Lokhi Puja is during the Navaratri, and after the Durga Puja, we Vijaya Dashami, after 5 days, we celebrate Lokhi Puja. And in Bengali culture, every home, every house, we celebrate this puja. And you heard all this story when Mr. Dotto talked. After hearing from Mr. Dotto, there is nothing I can share more important thing, because he shared a lot, all this story. And I think in this age, we can't believe how it takes place. And my thing is, you know, what I want to tell, that is, nobody held for this crime action. And not only then, still today, in this, the Bengal culture, if the victim is Hindu, then the judiciary system and the law enforcing agency, they are inactive. They are not.
Yes, so we have seen
anything.
that pattern a lot of times, and we'll discuss more about that a lot later
So
in some
only,
of the sessions.
I want to go back. Okay, I want to go back this Noakhali thing. Only one woman, Leela Rai, rescued 1,307 women victims. Those were forcefully, married and converted to Islam. Apart from that, around 50,000 Hindu remain abandoned in affected area, were under strict surveillance of Muslim hooligans. Noakhali genocide, also known as Noakhali Karens, was a series of massacre, rape, abduction, and forced conversion of Hindus, and loot, arson Hindus' property by Muslim community in district of Noakhali and Tripura. And nowadays has come, people are talking, those people are pious, and they are talking about the Mazar and peaceful Islam. And this mastermind behind this killing, the name was Ghulam Sarwar Hussain. They have a huge Mazar, and their forefather, the Muslim Peer family. You know, those people are talking about now the peaceful religious, the Muslim religion, and the Peer system, and the Sufi system. And this family, the Sarwar Hussain's family, was a Sufi, according to the their heretical thing. I want to share that thing. He was from Peer family and elected to the Bengal Legislative Assembly on Krishak Proja Party ticket. He was a parliament member. However, in 1946 election, he lost and joined Muslim League. And Ghulam Sarwar father and grandfather were pious Muslim and had lived a big, Mazar Sharif in Noakhali. The family, to be generation by generation, they are Khadim, because Pir, they have hereditarily Pir, one after another. So this Sarwar Hossain was a Pir, and he came from a Pir family, and they reserved a holy place, both, and this holy place, all Mazar, still now the Hindu, Muslim, all people are going to visit this Khadims or this Mazar Sharif. And this
Right.
Mazar.
So, sorry to interrupt you, Priyaji. We actually have one more person in this panel who has not been able to speak till now. So, because I want to keep this particular panel mostly about the victims who faced the Noakhali genocide, I want to go to Mahua from the Stories of Bengali Hindus. So, thank you so much for sharing. I think you shared some great insights about what about the Surawardi families and the peer
share
systems.
Just one more thing. Arutaji, maybe other people will miss this point. This point is just 2 minutes. In 1946, the provincial government of Bengal, they enacted a law. This law is through this law, they prohibited all media to publish news. And what was this thing? I need to share only this 4 points. This law, they enacted law in 1946 Bengal Province Government Ordinance stating that no incident of riot could be reported. Any statement, any advertisement, news, opinion related to the subject matter will be prohibited. The name of the place where riot took place, the manner who is the victim were killed or tortured, the name of the communities have been persecuted, and place of the temple have been destroyed. So through a law, enacting a law, they prohibited to publish news. That's why people don't know anything. And still now, Bangladesh government doing the same thing. They are prohibiting all this. They are keeping silent all this incident through their order.
And that explains why there is very little information anywhere on this particular genocide, because I was able to find only very few clippings from New York Times of all places, and not any Indian publication. So I was able to find very few clippings from Amrit Bazar Patrika, and not any other detailed information which we shared today, basically. So, Mahua, are you there?
Yes. Am I audible?
Yeah. Are you able to turn on your video?
Unfortunately, I keep it as a policy to not turn off on the video because I still have relatives in Bangladesh. So I'm trying to.
Okay, I understand. I'm just figuring out how to add you to the spotlight, because I don't think I can add you to the spotlight without that. But okay, you're audible, so please go ahead. Yes, please speak.
All right, I'll keep it very short because everyone else has spoken very thoroughly about this topic. My point is that since the Noakhali genocide, this is like an online commemoration event. My point is that this should not only stay in online, this should actually become the talking point nationally, because this involves a lot of war crimes, and they were all facilitated by the British Indian government. This was not just random people killing members of other community. This was planned and executed by the government of Bengal, which was under Muslim League back then. And it was this government, this Muslim League government was raised up by the British government. So they are directly and indirectly the reason behind this genocide in Noakhali. And this is why I added this point to our video that we shared to advertise this online event, point that the district magistrates of Noakhali were British, and they all collaborated with the Muslim League government because this was the policy of the British rule. And this is why it makes it a war crime, an extension of the war crimes of Britain too. And not to make it like as if the British were the only fault, because yes, it was also their collaborators, the Muslim League and everyone who participated in the Muslim League project. It was also their fault, but it is important to remember that this thing did not happen out of nowhere. It was very much planned by the government.
So we have covered this in the first session with which we started the program. So I think you tuned in late. We started the program at 5:30 p.m. So in the second session, this was covered in quite a bit of detail about what triggered the Noakhali genocide, essentially. And we discussed the role of different governments in that. So whoever is more interested in that, I request the video is already there on YouTube. You can go and check that out. So thank you, Mahua, and this team of Stories of Bengali Hindus. You've been really helpful in bringing out the testimonies of the victims. And I'm sorry I could not give too much time to everybody because unfortunately I was not expecting so many people to join in because it's so difficult to find survivors of the Noakhali genocide. So we now have our next panel, which is also an extremely important panel, and we already have the speaker here. So Tadgadda is already here, I think. So Namaste Tadgadda, are you able to hear me?
Thank you, Arti-ji. Am I audible?
Yes, yes, you're audible. So I just want to introduce Tadgadda. I think he does not need an introduction, but I'll just give a very brief introduction. So Tadgad Roy is the former governor of Tripura, Meghalaya and Arunachal Pradesh, and he was also the state president of BJP for West Bengal. So he has authored 5 books, and he has, of course, spoken and written. He's a versatile writer. But the most important book, which I think we'll refer to today also, is My People Approved It, in which he has documented the genocide of Bengali Hindus and the plight of Bengali Hindu refugees. So thank you so much for joining us, Tadgadji, and we're really honored to have you here today. So I just wanted to ask you, since you have worked so much in Bengal and you have written so much about the plight of Bengali Hindus, so please share your insights into, the plight of the refugees from the whole episode in Noakhali as well as Kolkata, and what really happened to those refugees, basically.
So I can certainly tell you that, but before that, may I take a little bit of time to explain the role of this Noakhali genocide or carnage in the total scheme of the expulsion of the Hindus from East Bengal?
Sure, yes, please
just
go ahead.
Take a short bit of time.
Yes, definitely. We want to understand that.
This was a continuous process which is going on even now. Even now it is going on, the expulsion of Hindus from the landmass, which was earlier known as East Bengal, then known as East Pakistan, and now is known as Bangladesh. During the last census before partition, that is 1941 census, Hindus constituted 29% of the population of the landmass, and right now they are down to about 8%. And quality-wise, the intellectual classes among the Hindus, they have all left. It is only the helpless people, the manual laborers, mostly the cultivators, the agriculturists and fishermen, who are left over there, who have no or very little leadership. Priya Saha is one of the few rare leaders who are giving them leadership. Otherwise, they have no leadership and they are a very persecuted lot. But I would say this much, that the persecution was much worse in Pakistani times, and a little better, but not much better after Bangladesh came on. And during the Awami League government, it is at a, I wouldn't say manageable or tolerable level, but it is lesser. That is one thing that has got to be granted. Now, talking about the general scheme of expertise, the exodus of Hindus, you see, the Noakhali carnage was only the beginning. Noakhali carnage was only the beginning. And after that became the independence and partition. That was in 1947. Between 1947 and 1950, there was sort of some pressure from the government, but there was no rioting, unlike in Punjab, where there was a total pogrom all over the state. During those 3 years from 47 to 50, there was persecution, but there was no general pogrom. The pogrom actually started in 1950 February. And between 1950 February and March, a huge mass of Hindus were driven out by a government-engineered pogrom. Government-engineered pogrom, I'll just give you one example. On the 12th of February in 1950, on a bridge, 1 kilometer long bridge across the Meghna River, between two stations called Bhairab Bazar and Ashuganj, all trains were stopped on the bridge. All Hindus were butchered and thrown into the river. Now, this could not have been done without the collaboration of the government. And in fact, the government was not only collaborating, they themselves had engineered. It was a person, the chief secretary of the East Pakistan government was one Aziz Ahmed. He was a Punjabi Muslim, and he had engineered this whole thing with the collaboration of a lot of Bengali Muslims. Thereafter, there was a pact called the Nehru-Liaquat Pact, in which Nehru very piously brought the Pakistanis over to our side and signed a pact with them saying that each country will look after their minorities. Now, pardon my language, but it was a stupid pact, nothing less than that. Because it could not have been unknown to Nehru that it was the Pakistani government itself which had engineered this. But he piously believed in Liaquat Ali Khan and he signed this pact. And after that, the Pakistan government took a policy of gradually squeezing out the Hindus. No big pogrom, because big pogroms, they attract attention, they engender counter pogroms in India or counter rioting. So they decided that they would gently squeeze out the Hindus, just like we squeeze toothpaste out of a tube. And it went on. In 1964 and 1971, there were real pogroms. In addition to the squeezing out, 1964, there was a thing called the theft of a relic of Hazrat Muhammad in Kashmir, which had nothing whatsoever to do with East Bengal, but that caused a riot and a whole lot of people were driven out. And in 1971, of course, it was the Bangladesh Liberation War. During the Bangladesh Liberation War, the Pakistanis decided that it is the Hindus who are responsible for this. So 80% of the casualties were Hindus. That time, some Muslims were also killed. Bengali Muslims were also killed. But 80% of the casualties were Hindus, and they were butchered. All these things have been described in my book. This book, My People Uprooted, which I recommend to all of you, not because it will get me some money by way of royalty, but it is, I can say with justice that this is a most comprehensive book in English on the subject of expulsion of Hindus from East Bengal, because compared to the expulsion of Hindus and Sikhs from Punjab, this is expulsion of Hindus from East Bengal is practically unknown, even to India. I shall come to that topic presently. Yes. Thereafter, during the Bangladesh time, there was once again this gentle squeezing, less virulent than what happened in the Pakistani times. But between 2001 and 2006, when Khaleda Zia had come to power heading a government of the BNP, Bangladesh National Party, there was once again a pogrom, and a lot of people were persecuted, a lot of people had left, they had come to India. This is more or less the total picture, which began with the Noakhali Genocide. Now, let me come to the subject that you have asked me to focus on, that is the plight of the people during the pogrom and after the pogrom. I will refer just to one FIR, police complaint, that was lodged by one Mrs. Baramala Roy. Baramala Roy, she is a widow of one late Manmohan Roy of village Govindapur, police station Begamganj on 17th October 1946. I shall very briefly go through it.
Yes,
On
please.
14th of October 1946, Monday morning, the complaint was given in Bengali. This has been translated by me. So on 14th October 1946, Monday morning, a huge crowd of Muslims attacked our house. I know many of them by face and one Musa by name. They set fire to our house while we ran to the terrace. They dragged some of us down and threw some down from the terrace. We saw from the terrace that some men were being knifed and speared. The women and children were taken near the steps of the pond to the north of the house. My late husband's elder brother Dinanath Rai had earlier been hit on the head. He was with us. His wife was tending to him. He was snatched away and thrown alive into a fire they had lit. His younger brother Ramani Mohan Roy was similarly thrown into the fire alive. Some of those thrown into the fire were trying to escape. They were again being forced into the fire. Some among the women had fainted from watching this. Then we were taken to another Hindu neighbor's house. The assailants snatched away all the jewelry that we were wearing on our noses and ears. In the process, many of our noses and ears were torn. Most of us had been stripped naked of our clothing. We were then taken to Pataris, that is another Hindu neighbor's house, and we were rescued yesterday by the police from the Pataris house and brought to Noakhali town. 17 of us were rescued from the Pataris house. This is signed by Baramala Rai, wife of late Manmohan Rai, village Govindapur, police station Begamganj, 17th October 1946. This is taken from a book called Chechollisher Diary. Chechollisher Diary means Diary of 1946 by Nirmal Kumar Bose. Nirmal Kumar Bose was an anthropologist who accompanied Mahatma Gandhi in his trip to Noakhali, and he acted as his interpreter. And this book described, because his credibility is very high because he did not belong to any Hindu group. In fact, he did not belong to politics at all. He was an anthropologist by profession. So this is one. Among the other people who have written about this, one is Rabindranath Datta, whom of course you have, I think you have heard him today. Then there was Dinesh Chandra Singha, who had died very recently. They are both native Noakhali people. Then apart from them, there was Nirmal Bose, of course, I have spoken about him, and Mrs. Ashoka Gupta. Ashoka Gupta was a wife of an ICS officer, but she had committed herself to Gandhiji, and she had accompanied Gandhiji during his trip in Noakhali. Now, one of the incidents, I will mention about what Ashoka Gupta has mentioned in her book, which will give you an idea of the state of the Hindus in Noakhali, even after the disturbances had apparently settled down. A family belonging to the Barbar caste had been visited by them, and the woman of the family, it was in the daytime, the woman of the family came out and she drew a long gungat, and from inside the gungat she said that some Muslims come here every night, and they take me out. For what purpose, I need not say. And then in the morning, they return me. And this has been going on for the last 1 month or so, even after the disturbances subsided. And she told, she requested Ashoka Gupta to do something about it. Ashoka Gupta could not do anything, and they eventually left for West Bengal. So this was the state, more or less, of the Hindus in Noakhali after the disturbances apparently subsided. So you can imagine what a terrible, terrible situation the Hindus were in. Now, another thing that I must mention, that I think one previous speaker, I don't know, I didn't get his name, her name, but she was talking with an American accent, probably lives in the United States. So she was saying that it is the British government which had engineered this. It is not exactly that. The British government has its complicity, but they were complicit, but it is slightly nuanced. What had happened is there was a man called Ghulam Sarwar Hussain, who was a Muslim League bigwig in the district. He had not been given a ticket in the election. So he thought that by slaughtering Hindus, he will be able to come up in the party. So he started touring the whole district and Noakhali district and part of the adjoining Tripura district, which is now called Kumilla or Chandpur district, part of that district, and lecturing about what Hindus do, how Hindus have tortured Muslims and all that, and now is the time to take out. Now, in this whole business, the British, by this time, the British had practically lost the will to rule. Otherwise, before this, in East Bengal, when there were riots, Hindu-Muslim riots, the British had used their police to quell the riots, which is why Hindus continued to live in East Bengal. But in 1946, it was a sort of a watershed when the British had lost their right to, their will to go on. And the British governor of the province was one Sir Frederick Burrows. Frederick Burrows had no idea of politics. He was a labor leader in Britain. He was a retired guard of British Railway. And he just took it in his stride, I mean, as if nothing had happened. In fact, Acharya J.V. Kriplani had once told him that the innumerable rapes are taking place. Actually, more than the number of murders in Noakhali, there were more rapes and forcible cases of forcible conversion. So when this rape thing was mentioned, this Burrows, he just bared his teeth shamelessly and he said, oh, that is bound to happen, you know. These Hindu women are much prettier than their Muslim sisters. So Acharya Kriplani had said that with great difficulty, I restrained my hand from slapping that man, Burrows. But this was the attitude of the British. The thing was engineered by this Ghulam Sarwar and of course supported by the Muslim League. There is no doubt about that. And the British were a passive onlooker. It is not as if the British had engineered it.
So they were indifferent to the whole thing. That's what you mean.
That's right. That's right. So once this thing was over and 1947, there was partition. Practically all Hindus from Noakhali left. Right now, there are hardly 2 to 3% Hindus left in Noakhali, and that too in the towns. In the countryside, there is no one. That is largely true of other parts of Bangladesh also, particularly which had seen these anti-Hindu pogroms, like Pabna, like certain other places like Pirojpur. These places, a lot of Hindus have left. Now, coming to the question of how they were treated as refugees in India, that is a very sad story. I have already told you that in 1950, there was a huge pogrom, terrible pogrom. And after that, Nehru had signed this stupid pact with Liaquat Ali Khan. And after having signed that pact, you know, Nehru was a sort of a fuzzy-wuzzy person. He used to imagine that what he was preaching would make people do those things. He had clear inputs from his intelligence of what was happening in East Pakistan. but he was so overcome with the idea of Hindu-Muslim friendship that he could not bring himself to believe that it was actually happening. So when Liaquat Ali Khan agreed to sign that pact, he said, no, now all problems are solved. With the result, with the terrible result that refugees kept on coming, with the terrible result that now Nehru said that we shall arrange only relief for them, no rehabilitation. Can you imagine? Say, if you compare the plight of the Punjabi refugees with the Bengali refugees, huge colonies were built in Delhi, like Kalkaji, Rajendra Nagar, Lajpat Nagar, all these places, they were built for rehabilitation of Punjabi refugees. But nothing was done for Bengali refugees because Nehru thought that by signing that pact, he has solved all problems. Actually, it was not so. So the Bengali refugees had a very horrible time. And this was taken advantage of by the Marxists, by the leftists, who put ideas in their heads and who convinced them that this is actually the Muslims are not at fault. This is an economic struggle because the Hindu zamindars had persecuted the Muslim cultivators in the earlier days. That is why the Muslims this is it. You know, the usual Marxist nonsense that they mouth all the time, trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. They keep on doing it because it has to be fit. It has to fit into them. And
so this whole narrative of agrarian trouble and economic trouble has been created by the Marxists later on. Is that
absolutely,
have I got it correct?
Yes,
okay.
yes. Actually, the Marxists and Nehru, they were together in this business. As a result of which, it became a sort of a dictum that a Muslim can do no wrong. You cannot speak ill of a Muslim no matter what he does. If a Hindu makes a slight commits a slight crime somewhere, then the whole sky will be brought down. But if a Muslim commits a pogrom or a genocide, it is not to be spoken of. I have mentioned it in my book, and I have also mentioned the kind of arguments that have been given by different people, by Marxists and by people who were not adequately informed, and by a whole lot of people. Then I was coming to the state of the Hindus who had been driven out and who had come to India as refugees. Now, Dr. B.C. Roy, who was the chief minister of West Bengal at that time, he was trying his best to arrange some kind of rehabilitation for the refugees. He had arranged for their rehabilitation in the Andaman Islands. Andaman Islands had the advantage of being uninhabited and having the same sort of climate as East Bengal. But this Marxist went preaching among the Muslims that you don't go to Andaman Islands. It's a terrible place. Do you know what it was used for? They had a penal colony there. So you will be treated like these prisoners. So a lot of refugees believed in them, and they did not go to Andaman Island. But quite a number of them went, and the ones who went, they have all prospered. I have gone to Andamans and I have seen they have all prospered. But many more could have gone, they did not go. Then what happened is that when the rehabilitation could not be found, then the government packed them off to a place called Dandakaranya. Dandakaranya is the tri-junction of Madhya Pradesh, UP, and Andhra. It's a very forested place and semi-arid. Parts of it are semi-arid. And the refugees were settled over there. And they had a very hard time eking out a livelihood over there. They were given some assistance. Some refugees were sent to Uttarakhand, some were sent to certain other parts of southern, southwestern Maharashtra, and all of them were in a bad way. But somehow, because the refugees, East Bengal refugees, were very hardworking people, they were mostly cultivators and all, they somehow managed to eke out a living. Then, in 1977, these leftists came to power in West Bengal. When the leftists came to power, the refugees who were in Dandakaran and who were in a lot of difficulty, he thought that these leftists had told us that we must be given rehabilitation in West Bengal. So they have come to power now. So if we go there now, they will certainly give us rehabilitation in West Bengal. They'll give us houses. So they sold everything that they had. And they traveled by train to West Bengal. Then by that time, the communists had changed their stance and they said, no, this is not practical. You go back to Dandakaran. Can you imagine? So the refugees refused to go. What they did is they decided that they will look after themselves. So they went to the Sundarbans Delta region, which is where the Ganga River, which is Hooghly River, which flows by Kolkata, which falls into the sea. Around that place, forested place, there was an island called Marinjhapi. They went to that island and settled down there and tried to make a living over there, tried to cultivate land. Now that was forest land. Then Jyoti Basu was at that time the chief minister. Jyoti Basu was a very ruthless and person and totally devoid of any conscience. It was Jyoti Basu who had given the leadership in making the refugees think that they will be given rehabilitation in West Bengal. But when the refugees came, Jyoti Basu sent communist goons after them, as also the police. They surrounded the island. The water around the island was brackish, and it was they had to bring drinking water from outside. So they stopped even the supply of drinking water, not to speak of food. And when these refugees were in such a terrible state, they tried to swim across the estuary to mainland. They were eaten by crocodiles and estuarine sharks. And a whole lot of people, they were, some of them were killed by these communist goons, and the rest were simply shipped back to Dandakaran. So this is how the whole thing proceeded. Meanwhile, there was from 1970s, early 70s, after the liberation of Bangladesh, Muslim infiltration started in West Bengal, from Bangladesh to West Bengal, because Bangladesh was at that time became a very impoverished and undernourished but overpopulated country. So they started entering West Bengal surreptitiously across the open border, and from there fanning out to all parts of the country. With the result that today in Delhi, there are certain areas like Silampur and Simapuri, which are full of Bangladeshi illegals. In Mumbai, there is an area called Badala, which is also full of Bangladeshi illegals. These people, mind you, in spite of their being illegals, they had been given false papers by these communist government, because the communist government looked upon them as a vote bank. But meanwhile, Hindus were also coming. The Hindus were not given any kind of succor. On the other hand, they were dubbed as illegal infiltrators, and they were always told that you better support us. You can't vote because they were not given citizenship. You can't vote, but you must support us. Otherwise, it's back to Bangladesh. So that is the kind of thing that happened to the refugees. Actually, the comparison between Punjabi refugees and Bengali refugees, one very unfortunate outcome is that a lot of people think that the Punjabi refugees were very hardworking and the Bengali refugees were useless, feckless people. That is not at all correct. The sort of assistance that was given to the Punjabi refugees, I have already mentioned Lajpat Nagar, Rajendra Nagar, Kalkaji, these places. Plus, in the Pilibhit area of northern UP, they were given, in the Udham Singh Nagar district, they were given huge tracts of land, the cultivators, with the result that that area is now populated mostly by Sikh refugees from West Pakistan. No such thing was given to Bengali refugees. Nehru, instead of that, kept on in his frame that I've signed that back to Liaquat, everything is taken care of, God is in heaven and all's right with the world. This kind of thing. So in this short time, I have tried to give you an overview of this. Let me, before finishing, let me tell you one thing, that I have made it a mission of my life to bring the story of the expulsion of Bengali Hindus from East Pakistan / Bangladesh to the notice of the world. I have been trying this thing since the 1990s. I'm still doing it. My book, My People Uprooted, has now run to 4 editions. The newest edition is just about to come. And in every other possible way, I'm trying to further their interests. Certain other people have also come into this thing. Priya Saha is one person. Then there is another person called Advocate Ravindra Ghosh in Bangladesh. Then there is another person called Ravindranath Trivedi. Trivedi sounds very UP, but he is actually a Bengali Hindu in Bangladesh. Then there are people in the United States who have taken up cudgels and who are doing something about it. And there are Muslims. There are very notable Muslim writers like Muntasir Mamun, then Abul Barkat, then Taslima Nasreen, of course, then Shahriar Kabir, then Salam Azad. These people have been writing about the persecution of Hindus in Bangladesh. And there is an American author called Richard Benkin, who has also written about it. So with all these things, I am hopeful that within a short time, we will be able to bring this terrible case of human rights violation to the notice of the world. And thank you very much. I conclude here. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you so much, Tatkadra, for such a great insight into the plight of the refugees of the Noakhali Genocide and the pogroms that continued after that, and the expulsion of the Bengali Hindus. So, like I mentioned in the beginning also, I think it's very important everybody reads his book, My People Uprooted, which he showed in the middle of the session also, which documents this persecution of Hindus. And I'm really grateful that you were able to join today and share this with all of our audience. And we'll upload this video on YouTube and on other places as well afterwards. So thank you so much. And I also wanted to highlight one thing. This is a news clipping I read on the stand of Nehru. So when the Hindus had basically started to react to the genocides in Kolkata and in Noakhali, Nehru was threatening that he will bomb the place with shells from the Air Force if the reaction of the Hindus did not stop. So this was how extreme his stand was as regards the Hindus giving a backlash versus stopping the persecution of the Hindus. So thank you so much. So we will just be starting with the next session with Dr. Robert Spencer in a few minutes. I'll just I'll give a short break for a few minutes, and then we'll be back in just 5 to 10 minutes. Please stay tuned in. So I am back, and we'll now have the next session with Dr. Robert Spencer. So, Dr. Spencer, can you hear me? Are you there?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, wonderful. I'm just adding you to the spotlight. So, thank you so much for joining. And we are now in, one of the last few segments. We have 2 more sessions after this. So Dr. Spencer, I think, needs no introduction, but for those of you who are unfamiliar with his work, I'll just give a very brief introduction to him. He's the director of Jihad Watch. It's a very, very popular website. And he's also the author of 23 books, including many bestsellers like The Truth About Muhammad, The History of Jihad, Did Muhammad Exist?, The Critical Quran, and of course, there's a whole list of books I could go on and on. But I want to invite Dr. Spencer specifically today to elaborate on, what is the ideology and what is, the belief system which drives genocides like the one we're discussing today, which is the Noakhali Genocide, and any other insights he would like to share. So, Dr. Spencer, please go ahead. What can you tell us about this particular ideology, and what really is jihad, so to say?
Yes, thank you. In the first place, jihad means struggle, and there are as many connotations of the word jihad in Arabic as there are of the word struggle in English. And so there can be small struggles and great struggles. The struggle to lose weight or quit smoking, and the struggle between civilizations, the struggle against communism, and so on. In the same way, there are many jihads. The Islamic Republic of Iran has a department of agricultural jihad, which doesn't mean blowing things up on farms. It means trying to increase crop yields and make the farm more efficient, the struggle on the farm. But primarily, in Islamic theology and law, the jihad means warfare against non-Muslims for the purpose of destroying whatever non-Muslim government may be existing in the particular region against which jihad is being waged, and installing an Islamic government based on Sharia Islamic law. That is the classic meaning and the primary meaning of jihad throughout Islamic history. And that is ultimately the reason underlying the genocide and the riots that we are discussing today. This is why they took place. In the first place, there is an imperative in the Quran, the holy book of Islam, to strike terror in the hearts of the enemies of Allah. That is chapter 8, verse 60. And so this kind of incident is obviously designed to strike terror on a massive scale among the Hindu populations in Bangladesh or in the area of India that these things took place at that time, and all over India, including the areas that became Pakistan and Bangladesh shortly thereafter, or Pakistan and East Pakistan first, and then Bangladesh later. The imperatives to strike terror in the hearts of the enemies of Allah, as per the Quran, is not solely for a terror for its own sake. The terror is directed toward a specific purpose, and that purpose is to terrify the unbelievers into submitting. And the Quran speaks about this in chapter 9, verse 29. It says to fight against those who do not obey Allah and his messenger, and do not forbid what he has forbidden, even if they are of the people of the book, until they pay the jizya, which is a tax, with willing submission and feel themselves subdued. So one imperative of this fight is to ensure that the non-Muslims are subdued, subjugated, rendered a second-class status under the rule of Islamic law. And the second-class status in question is actually one that is not classically or in the Quran offered to Hindus at all. And their situation is even worse than that, because the Quran says in the passage that I just quoted, chapter 9, verse 29, that this submission is to be offered to the people of the book, The people of the book, according to Islamic theology, are the Jews, the Christians, the Zoroastrians, and a few other groups, but not the Hindus. The Hindus are considered to be polytheists who are subject to the classic verse of the sword, call of chapter 9, verse 5 in the Quran, slay the mushrikun, those who associate partners with Allah, that is, or polytheists, wherever you find them. So killing the Hindus or converting them to Islam under Islamic law as it is delineated in the Quran are the only choices. And that is also one thing that leads to this kind of massacre, that the Muslims in question believe that they have a command before Allah to massacre Hindus. And
So
that
they
they're
take
not,
it as a religious duty. Would you say
Oh, yeah.
that? Okay.
very much so.
So they
It's-
think
it-
they are better Muslims by doing this sort of a thing?
Oh, yes. As a matter of fact, the Quran also says in chapter 9, verses 14 and 15, fight them and Allah will punish them by your hands. So in other words, they become the instruments of the punishment that Allah renders to the unbelievers, which is promised in the Quran to the unbelievers in this world as well as the next world. So they become the tools of the wrath of Allah. And then the Quran goes on to say that if you do this, then this will soothe the bosoms of the believers. And so if a believer is feeling distress or depression or despair or something of that kind, then he can soothe his soul by killing unbelievers. And this is actually
So
promised
this
in the
is
Quran.
this is like that's the solution to feeling low or depressed, basically.
Yes, it's the solution to that. Exactly. You don't need to try to improve your mental outlook. You don't need to take Prozac. You just need to kill unbelievers and you'll feel so much better. This is a promise of the Quran. Now, the status of the people of the book became a matter of practicality in India. That is, even though technically the Hindus are not the people of the book, and thus are to be massacred or converted to Islam. Very early on in the Muslim conquests of India, when Muhammad ibn Qasim entered Sindh in the 8th century, it was understood that very early on it was going to be impossible to kill or convert all the Hindus. And so they were awarded a kind of honorary people of the book status and often forced to submit to pay the jizya and given the same kind of status of dimitude that the Jews and Christians were given in Europe and the Middle East. However, nonetheless, this was a matter of concession, not of divine command. And that's a very big distinction because it meant that the jihad in India would continue to be waged with a great deal more ferocity and violence and inhumanity than it was ever waged anywhere else against the people of the book, because the Hindus were still technically not people of the book. And so there's story after story after story, and I discuss them in the book, The History of Jihad, using ancient Islamic sources that show that both they boast about the destruction of Hindu temple after Hindu temple, thousands of temples over many centuries. And in so many cases, the same Muslim historians or contemporary court chroniclers of the conquests of the various rulers that they served, they discuss how the idols were broken into pieces and then strewn at the front of the mosques. And the mosques were often built, of course, as is well known, on the site of where those temples had stood, so that the Muslims would then trample on the Hindu gods on their way into and out of the mosques. And this was designed, of course, to humiliate and demoralize the Hindus so that they would be afraid to fight against the Muslims. Terror would be struck in their hearts, as per the Quranic command. And then there would be no quarter given to them. They would be forced into this status of subjugation. But the destruction of the temples, and the targeting of Hindu worship was something that was carried out with a great deal more ferocity in India than it was in Europe or in the Middle East.
Right.
Although
So I have a question here. So, in your book, History of Jihad, you have, of course, spoken in great detail about the Islamic invaders and their policy, which you also just described. So, many times people say that, the Muslims of India, or the Islamists, they have reformed, or, it's a folly to correlate them or to say that they are descendants of Aurangzeb or, Ghazni or all of those people. But the pattern we are seeing that you've just described, which is the desecration of Hindu temples and, the striking terror in the hearts of Hindus, the patterns are exactly the same as what the Islamic invaders committed, right? So, since you are an expert on this, and I know you've researched this extensively, so would you say that this is the same pattern or the same continuous, the continuation of the same agenda which started with Muhammad Ghazni or, his successors?
Oh, there's no doubt about that whatsoever. What the apologists who say that it's not fair to say these are the descendants of Aurangzeb or something of that kind, what they do not want you to know is that there's never been any rejection of these doctrines, never been any consideration of them. They are from the Quran. The Quran is considered to be immutable and perfect, the unalterable word of Allah that is applicable at all times and in all places for all people in whatever circumstances. And so consequently, if the imperative to kill the mushrikun wherever you find them, to kill the polytheists is in the Quran, it can't be reformed or rejected or reconsidered. Now, there's a great deal of confusion about these questions nowadays because there are a great many liars out there. And the liars will tell you that these commands of the Quran only apply to the 7th century, at a time when Muhammad and the early Muslims were supposedly threatened and fearing for their lives. And they were given the opportunity to fight back. But if you look at, for example, by comparison, and there's no need to get into lengthy comparisons here today, but there's no doubt that there were, in many cases in the history of Christianity, very serious reconsiderations and changes of course that came about by conscious decision and reformation and rejection of earlier beliefs and practices.
Yes.
There's nothing like that in Islamic history. Throughout Islamic history, there is always jihad. That's one thing that's very clear, actually, if you read the history of jihad, that it's a constant, that there's not a time when it's ever set aside. There are periods here and there where the Muslims did not have the means to carry it out. For example, in India, during some times of the British presence there, that the British were so powerful vis-a-vis the Muslim forces that they found it pointless to wage jihad against them, which is not to say that they ever discarded the idea altogether. But the idea that this was ever reconsidered, there's no basis for that. It's never happened. It's only been a matter of, do the Muslims have the physical means, the military, the martial ability to carry out attacks against the non-Muslims, or do they not? And those are the only reasons, when the Muslims were weak, that there was ever a pause in jihad activity throughout 1400 years.
That's extremely important insight, because there are many apologists even in India who claim that with the advent of the British, with the fall of the Mughal Empire, after the fall of Bahadur Shah Zafar and his descendants, there was somehow a softening up of Islam and Hindu-Muslim unity, and all those concepts were brought about with you were just discussing Nehru and his allies in the Muslim League. But then the partition of India happened in 1947. So from what I can analyze, based on my study of the genocides of Hindus, that partition was a direct result of this continuation of the same ideology. So would you agree with me on that the whole agenda of the Muslim League and the partition of India along religious lines, of course, was a direct result of implementation of the ideology of jihad?
Oh, there's no doubt about that whatsoever. Anybody who looks honestly at the history of the period leading up to the partition and the partition itself we'll see that the entire motivating assumption of underlying it was that Islam must dominate and not be dominated, which is a very old adage in Islam, that for Muslims to be under the rule of the unbelievers is an unacceptable humiliation, because Islam teaches that the Muslims are the best of people. This is chapter 3, verse 110 of the Quran. The best people on earth are the Muslims, whereas the unbelievers, in chapter 98, verse 6, we read that the unbelievers are the most vile of created beings. So are the most vile of created beings going to rule over the Muslims? That's unacceptable. When the British came, they didn't have any choice because they couldn't defeat them. But when the British left and the British were susceptible to the idea of partition, then it became a matter of absolute Islamic imperative, because there was no way that the Muslims were going to be under the rule of Hindus. And this is one of the main reasons why there's strife in India today with the Muslim population there, because they also consider that it's unacceptable to be under the rule of Hindus. The Muslims must dominate. They are the best of people on earth. Not only does the Quran say they're the best of people on earth, but the same passage, once again, chapter 3, verse 110, says you are the best of people on earth, enjoining what is right and forbidding what is wrong. And so the strong implication is that the Muslims are only the best of people because they tell the rest of us what's right and wrong. And the non-Muslims don't know what's right and wrong, you see, and we enjoin various things that are wrong and say that they're right, and vice versa in the Islamic perspective. And so consequently, it's all the more important that the Muslims not be under the rule of the Hindus in the India or in anywhere in the world, as a matter of fact, because the unbelievers will makes acceptable what is not acceptable and make unacceptable what is acceptable.
Right. So now I come to another question where, a lot of these, crimes committed against Hindus, some of them are very large-scale crimes, like what happened in Noakhali. But even before the Noakhali Genocide, which you're talking about, and even after that, there were many, scattered, smaller-scale violence against Hindus. Or even now, as we see in Bangladesh, there's literally burning of Hindu villages. And even in what we discussed in the previous session, there was a systematic expulsion of Hindus from Islamic Bangladesh or East Pakistan, as it was back then. So whether it be the large-scale crimes or the small-scale crimes, can we put them both in sort of like the same balance as far as what is driving that agenda is concerned? Because, we've discussed so far about the pogroms, about the massacres, but there are also the smaller, slow-paced, so to say, expulsion or extermination of Hindus or conversion of Hindus. So would that be in line with what you're saying?
Yes, very much so. It's all the same ideology that motivates all of it. The classic Islamic theology and law teaches that only the caliph, as the leader of all the Muslims, is authorized to wage jihad. And this is one of the things that Islamic apologists say today, that all these jihad terror groups, Al-Qaeda and ISIS and the Taliban and all the rest of them, none of them are legitimate because none of them are the arm of a caliph, and only the caliph can declare jihad. However, this overlooks, or actually it willfully ignores, several very important aspects of Islamic law. Most often these apologists are depending upon the ignorance of the infidels. And so it's very important for the non-Muslims to educate themselves about the true nature of Islamic theology and law. In Islamic theology, it is true, only the caliph can declare offensive jihad. That is, the classic idea is that the caliph, as the leader of the caliphate, like the Ottoman Sultan, the last one in history, would declare jihad against a non-Muslim state and go to war against it, Hungary or whichever, and wage jihad against it. But at the same time, that is something that the individual can do because, for example, Muhammad is asked at one point, what is a deed greater than jihad? And he says, I can't think of such a deed. So in other words, there's nothing greater than jihad. And also, jihad can be defensive, that in the absence of a caliph, whenever a Muslim land is considered to be attacked, then every Muslim has the obligation to wage jihad. And in waging jihad, because it is the greatest deed that anybody can do, you can get your sins washed away or get them forgiven. Actually, you get them outweighed, because in Islam, there's the large scales. And if your good deeds outweigh your bad deeds, then you go to paradise. And if your bad deeds outweigh your good deeds, you go to hell. This is chapter 21, verse 47 of the Quran. So if the greatest deed is jihad, and you have so many bad deeds outweighing your good deeds, but then you wage jihad, that outweighs all the bad deeds. So you get into paradise.
So
and
that's
so
like the trump card for a Muslim, basically.
Yeah. It's a trump card that any individual Muslim can take up, because you can always argue that a Muslim land is being attacked. This is what the Palestinians say about Israel. And it's also said many times in India as well, because there are Muslims who believe that all of India, having been ruled in history under Muslims, belongs by right to Islam forever, and that it has been unjustly taken over by Hindus in India proper. Consequently, the Muslims have the imperative to drive them out from where they drove you out, which is chapter 2, verse 191 of the Quran. And so they can wage jihad anytime without a caliph, because they are taking care of their sins that way, and because they are waging defensive jihad, which is an obligation on every individual.
So that may be the reason why we hear so much in India about, how Muslims are so scared in India, how Muslim minorities are under threat, because that completely justifies waging jihad, or whether it is on a small individual level or on a community level or on a political level. So we have, of course, political tussles like we have in West Bengal and like we had in Noakhali. But, we have an expression in Hindi called Dara hua Musalman, or, the scared Muslim. So that, that just one phrase is enough to trigger the Muslim community to come back to purging themselves of their sins, essentially.
Yeah. Well, you're quite right. This is very important, because the list of grievances that Muslim leaders like to retail in India, as well as everywhere else in the world, is all based on the idea of defensive jihad, that the grievances justify striking back at the infidels because the Muslims are under attack. And see, the non-Muslim leaders all over the world, they misunderstand this. And they think, oh, this means these poor people are suffering. And if we give them various concessions, we give them money, we give them special accommodations of some kind, that will pacify the situation and everything will be all right. And what they don't realize is all that it will do is lead to a new list of grievances that will renew the problem altogether. Because the point of the grievances is not what the non-Muslim leaders think it is. It is not that they want the grievances redressed. It's that they want to incite individual Muslims to wage jihad.
So at this point, I want to just remind the audience also, we discussed this in the beginning, that in the beginning of the Noakhali Genocide, there was a systematic propaganda of Muslims of that Noakhali region, where they basically, exaggerated the so-called discrimination by Hindus. So, after killing Hindus in Noakhali, this was before October 10th, some Hindus refused to serve Muslim customers in their shops, for example. So those kind of incidents were completely blown out of proportion by the Muslim League leaders in Noakhali. And that was used as a reason to incite all the Muslims of that region. Now, this is very important to understand, I think, because a lot of times we wonder, how are Muslims able to get so united so quickly? How are they able to get arms and ammunition in such a short period of time? And Hindus are not able to. Because, like as Dr. Spencer is just explaining, they have this one, clause, if I can call it that, where if you're under attack, if you're being threatened, you are completely at freedom to purge your sins by waging jihad. So if any incident can basically be projected in such a way as to unite the entire Muslim community in a region, to give them a legitimate excuse, a legitimate reason to wage war on Hindus, they will basically do so. So is my interpretation correct, Dr. Spencer? So I'm just connecting it with this particular genocide which we are talking about today.
Yes, it is. So much of Islamic culture works on the basis of shame and honor, or another way to say this is pride and humiliation. And so the stories you're discussing about how Muslims were refused service in Hindu-owned shops, this is a great humiliation. And the Muslims have an imperative before Allah to humiliate the infidels, not to be humiliated or to tolerate such a thing. But chapter 9, verse 29 that I cited earlier, remember, it says that the non-Muslims, the people of the book, must be made to submit, to feel themselves subdued. And that means be humiliated. That humiliation was often enforced throughout the world in the collection of the jizya, that the Muslims would spit in the faces of the non-Muslims paying the jizya to remind them of their humiliation. And so being refused service in a shop, that's an intolerable turning of the tables. And the non-Muslims are humiliating the Muslims. That can't be allowed to stand. They have to be killed.
Right. So, I mean, this looks like a very, very supremacist approach to existence. I mean, it's very blatantly so, of course, but of course, Muslims imply always that, you know, we are subjugating them. Whereas if you look at you know, the annals of history as well as what their theology says, this looks like completely flipped, where as you're explaining, you know, the Muslims cannot tolerate any humiliation. It's their injunction to follow, where they are supposed to humiliate the Hindus. So I now come to another question which I have for you, which many people ask me and many people use to justify jihad, where they say that, you know, jihad is sort of like, you know, like we explained, struggle. So it's like a spiritual transformation of the individual. So, but at the same time, we see a very different interpretation of jihad by the Islamist mobs as well as the terrorist groups. So, you know, can you untangle this for me, please?
You mean various interpretations of
yes,
what the word?
And you know, do you think it's possible for somebody to have like a really actual spiritual interpretation of jihad, or is there so-called spiritual interpretation also like the one you explained to, you know, be free of depression by killing Hindus? So is that what it is? Because this is something I've heard so many Muslims explain to me about how jihad is spiritual transformation. So I just wanted your view on that, basically.
Well, a great deal of the talk about jihad being spiritual transformation is just designed to make infidels ignorant and complacent. It is not really so prominent that an idea. Jihad is generally understood as meaning action against unbelievers. Now, it may be jihad of the pen, jihad of the tongue. In other words, taking up apologetics is a kind of jihad, and fooling the unbelievers in this way, as Muhammad is supposed to have said, war is deceit. It may be financing the jihad with your pocketbook while not fighting it yourself. Fair enough. That's not martial jihad either. But the idea that jihad is primarily something that just involves increasing one's prayer and one's charitable actions and so on, this is an idea that some Sufis have, yes, but even that does not preclude violent jihad.
Right.
Often in the West, the Sufis are invoked as being the spiritual Muslims who are our friends because they believe in jihad is totally spiritual.
Right.
And it's certainly true that the Sufis have a developed spirituality that is not present in other forms of Islam. However, at the same time, the Sufis have never rejected violent jihad.
Right.
And this is a deception when people say, oh, they're not violent. The Sufis for centuries in the Caucasus were leaders of the jihad against the Russian Empire. The Sufis are a very strong influence on the Muslim Brotherhood, which is dedicated to reestablishing Sharia everywhere in the world, and has no problem with violence, although it also works in nonviolent ways. And so the idea that there is spiritual jihad that somehow precludes violent jihad. Well, there's just no indication of this in Islam as it is currently practiced or as it has been practiced in history.
Right. I think that's extremely important to understand because, you know, a lot of people just believe what they're told, essentially. So they don't actually have enough knowledge of history nor of the Quran, for example. So now I have another question for you. So you gave a few examples already of jihad by pen or by financing or, you know, other means. But what does the Quran say about the means of jihad? Is it like, does it give like a free hand to the Muslims on whichever way they want to wage it? Or is there like a specific method or means which has been, you know, prescribed, so to say?
Well, the means of jihad, there are a few passages about that. Chapter 8, verse 60 is one that I referred to before in saying strike terror in the hearts of the enemies of Allah. The full verse says, make ready the steeds of war to strike terror in the enemies of Allah. And so this is very clear that it's not a spiritual jihad because you don't have war horses when you're trying to pray more.
Right.
It's very clearly means violence and warfare. As a matter of fact, there is an edition of the Quran in English published in Saudi Arabia that has parenthetical glosses in the text to clarify its meaning. And at that point in chapter 8, verse 60, it says, make ready steeds of war. And then in parentheses, it says tanks, weapons, machine guns, and so on, just in case you don't get the point. Also, the same chapter of the Quran, chapter 8, verse 41, also says that you should give a tenth of the, I believe it's 41. In any case, it's in chapter 8. But check that passage. I'm not entirely sure where it is. But the chapter 8 is called the spoils of war. And there is a verse in there that says to give a fifth of the spoils of war to Allah and his messenger. And even to this day, it is incumbent upon a jihadi to give a fifth of what he wins to the lawful Islamic authority. Now, you don't have spoils of war in a spiritual jihad. And so it's very clear if you're asking about the means of war in the Quran only envisions jihad as warfare against unbelievers. It doesn't envision the idea of sitting in your room and praying as jihad. That's a later idea that's designed to make us all non-Muslims feel better about all of this.
Right, and sort of preventing births in Hindu community, for example, and you know the mass rapes of women, for example, which happened in the Noakhali Genocide.
Yes.
So, yeah.
That is certainly a very important means of jihad. And it must be emphasized, as unpleasant as it is, that the mass rapes we saw in the Noakhali riots and others, and also that we see now in Britain from the Pakistani rape gangs that have preyed on thousands of British girls, as well as Hindu girls and Sikh girls in Britain. And we see the same thing in Nigeria and the same thing among ISIS groups that with the Yazidis in Iraq and Syria. The idea is that the infidel women can be taken as sex slaves. And this is based on the Quran. This is not some extremist idea that hijacks the true peaceful Islam. Chapter 4, verse 3 says that you can marry up to 4 women or take the captives of the right hand. Now, who are the captives of the right hand? In chapter 4, verse 24, it's a long list of various women that a Muslim man cannot have sex with. His mother, his sister, and so on and so on. But it makes a specific exception. You can use the captives of the right hand sexually. Chapter 23, verse 1 to 6 praises the Muslim man who is chaste except with his wife or the captives of the right hand. Chapter 33, verse 50 of the Quran says that the captives of the right hand are the spoils of war, women who are captured in battle. Now, all this indicates that the Muslim is authorized in the Quran to take non-Muslim women and rape them. And this is something that is completely permissible in Islam. As a matter of fact, a manual of Islamic law stipulates that when a married woman is captured, her marriage is immediately annulled, because otherwise it would be adultery, you see. And so the legal niceties are all taken care of, but this is essentially the legalization of rape and the legitimization of rape. And this is one reason why we saw it in the riots in 1946, and why we see it in the jihad groups today, and why, if you read the history of jihad, you will see that this is a constant of Islamic history. Wherever there's jihad conquest, there's mass rape. And this is something that Muhammad is also said to have practiced in the Islamic traditions. And so there's no greater warrant for the validity of a practice than that it is sanctioned in the Quran and by the example of Muhammad, and this has both.
Right. Thank you so much for explaining that, because many of these things sort of, get lost in translation, both literally and metaphorically, because many people like to translate things as, whatever they will. So, this gives a huge insight into what really happened in the Noakhali genocide and what is continuing and why it's continuing. Because if you don't recognize the problem, we're all essentially solving a wrong problem, like you explained. You give provisions to Muslims, or you try to rehabilitate them, or you try to reform them, or you try to maybe make their economic condition better. So that's not going to work, because we've seen that the repetition of the Noakhali genocide happened again and again on a much larger scale, in fact, in other parts of the country. And even what we are seeing now happen in India, maybe not on that huge a scale, but still we have cases like the Delhi riots, like the violence in West Bengal, where they essentially invoke the verses of Quran, and they chant, chant is probably the wrong word, but they invoke Allah when they're committing these crimes. So thank you, Dr. Spencer, so much for sharing these insights with us and informing and educating our audience. And we will also be uploading this video on YouTube eventually. And is there any concluding remarks you would like to give us from your side?
The main thing is to understand what we've been discussing, that the ideology behind all of this throughout history and today is all the same.
Right.
And we need to see, ultimately, if we're going to defeat this, there needs to be an international coalition based on a recognition of this ideology and an opposition to it. Instead, of course, all our governments are pretending it doesn't exist.
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah. So that's extremely important, that we get recognition for the genocide as well as what's causing the genocide, like you said. So thank you so much, Dr. Spencer, for joining us today, for taking out the time. I know you've been traveling and you've been busy, but it's really important for people to understand this from an expert like you. That's why I wanted to invite you today. So thank you so much.
Invitation. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm honored by your asking me, and wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you. So here we'll just take a 5-minute break, and Dr. Rajat Mitra will be joining us in a few minutes, and we'll continue the session with Dr. Rajat Mitra in just a few minutes. So please stay tuned. So I'm back, and Dr. Rajat Mitra is not able to log in immediately, so he'll be joining us in a few minutes. But until then, we actually have Utsav Da here with us today, who has so gracefully agreed to have his session earlier, and we will just have him join us for a brief overview of the Noakhali Genocide, its place in the whole scheme of things in history, and what was the fallout of the Noakhali Genocide. So, Utsavda, are you able to hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible. So, thank you so much for joining us. And I wanted you to give us, an overview of what role Noakhali Genocide played in the partition of India, and the subsequent events, and where do the Hindus of Noakhali and even Bangladesh basically stand today. So, please go ahead, share.
Yes. So I just wanted to start by giving a quote from October 1946 Anand Bazar Patrika, which is which till today is actually one of the big newspapers in the eastern part of the Indian subcontinent, but in those days was the primarily prominent newspaper. And this article was written by S.L. Ghosh. It was the most circulated paper in Bengal, the larger Bengal under the British. And I'm just going to quote from there to start to give an idea, and then I can expand upon it because that quote itself will describe what Noakhali meant for the rest of the subcontinent as well as the future. Quote starts: "The horror of the Noakhali outrage is unique in modern history, in that it was not just a simple case of turbulent members of the Muslim community killing off helpless members of the minority Hindu community, but was one whose chief aim was of mass conversion, accompanied by loot, arson, and wholesale devastation." The Anand Bazar Patrika article goes on. "No section of the Hindu community has been spared, the wealthier classes being dealt with more drastically. Abduction and outrage of Hindu women and forcible marriages were also resorted to. The slogans used and the methods employed indicate that it was all part of a plan for the simultaneous establishment of Pakistan." Unquote. So this is S.L. Ghosh writing in Anand Bazar Patrika from 1946. And the reason I started with this quote, because this quote kind of sums up what I am going to probably talk about in different ways, in different means for the next few minutes of our conversation. And that was primarily that this was a test case, almost an experiment to see how not only you can scare and eradicate Hindus from a certain region, but you actually encourage them to convert to Islam, which primarily, brings so many socio-political, philosophical, and even theological quote-unquote benefits.
I think I can hear you now.
So, please continue. Yeah.
So that is I think one of the main reasons why this was done. And it did lead to many things that happened later on that were relevant to the partition of the Indian subcontinent, and later on even events that are happening today. What Noakhali did was it set up the grounds for more such massacres in not just in Bengal, but also in the western part, which is present-day Pakistan. It created a template for how you can target the wealthier, more economically sounder Hindu communities and render them helpless to help the poor Hindus. Because once you take out the rich or the Hindus with more means, they are going to not to be in a position where they can help out the poorer Hindus who probably need the most help during a violent aggression. So that template was set up. The template of kidnapping of Hindu women and converting them to Islam psychologically dominating the other Hindu population segments in other parts of the region was established. And the failure of the Hindu community to address all these issues, whether it was Hindu Mahasabha or the Congress party, reinforced the narrative that the Hindu leadership has been defeated psychologically and physically by the Muslims, thus paving the way for what happened thereafter.
So basically, this was meant to be not just a physical, expulsion or extermination of Hindus, but also, like we were just discussing in the previous session, a way to strike terror in the Hindu mind and to basically scare people into submission and to basically make the path to Ghazwa-e Hind or Pakistan that much simpler, right? That, this was like a template, like you were saying, or a pilot to show that, this is basically what's going to be executed if our demands are not met. And I think even Jinnah is, very quoted to say this verbatim, that, that this violence will basically continue until we have Pakistan. Ladke lenge Pakistan, mar ke lenge Pakistan was the slogan, essentially. So this Noakhali genocide, if I'm correct here, is that it was a model which showed the entire country that, this is what you're going to get until, you submit, essentially.
Correct. And more importantly, it was a message about the Hindu leadership. See, because what had happened, right, if I track back a little bit, I don't know if this was discussed in the earlier sessions, but this was the intended outcome of the direct action day in Kolkata as well. But because the Hindu community in Kolkata surprisingly fought back to create some level of tactical parity in the actual riots, the message was not clear, as Sohrawardi as well as Jinnah intended to make it clear that there is an absolute domination of the Muslim community in terms of the ability to do violence. And that message wasn't sent out during the direct action day because the Hindus actually bravely fought back. So they had to regroup and choose an area where the Hindus were significantly disconnected from the rest of the Indian subcontinent because of the waterways and the remoteness of that area, and reapply their template of absolute domination through violence. And the inability of the Hindu community leadership, the Hindu Mahasabha couldn't even go there. And Gandhi went there for 4 months, but was a helpless spectator in the violence. So it was the failure of the Hindu community leadership that kind of got exhibited. And that from there onwards, partition was inevitable, because when your leaders fail you, it means it creates a psychological vacuum in the minds of the people.
So why don't you tell us about Gandhi's Bakri here?
Yeah, so Gandhiji was a very spiritual person, a person who a lot of millions of dollars were spent on him, but he still tried to live, despite all the expenses, a very frugal life. So as Acharya Rajneesh once said that Gandhi's poverty was worth millions of dollars. So Gandhi used to have a goat whose milk Gandhi used to partake in, and the goat went around with him whenever he went. It was a goat is a nutritious source of it's a source of nutrition, but doesn't require much space. So the goat used to travel around with Gandhiji, who crisscrossed the country, incessantly to bring the people together in so many ways. So he tried. I mean, Gandhiji was, to his credit, the only leader, Hindu leader, who was able to go to Noakhali. Other Hindu leaders, even more aggressive ones, could not even go there. So Gandhiji went there, to his credit. So, but when he was there, the Muslims, as always go for sending psychological messages, because that's important to their conquest narrative. So they killed the goat of Gandhiji and from where he used to drink the milk every day, and cooked it and ate it for a meal. So the reason I say this anecdote is because this actually highlights again the efforts by Islamists to dominate Hindu minds through psychological tools. When Gandhi is helpless to even protect his own goat, how can he protect the Hindus of of Noakhali was the message that was sent out.
Right. So I asked you to narrate this anecdote basically because to me it seems like Hindus were like that goat of Gandhiji, that we were basically slaughtered on the altar of this tussle between two leaders and the inability of one Hindu leadership doing something about the problem. And I also wanted to discuss the Bihar riots which happened afterwards, and the stance of different leaders during the Bihar riots, including Gandhiji. As far as I've read, I hear that Gandhiji went on a fast to, basically ask Hindus to stop their violent stand, and Mr. Nehru threatened to bomb the place with Air Force. So, these are what I've read in the news snippets, but I wanted you to just give an overview of, what transpired after the Noakhali genocide and, what led to the Bihar riots, what was the outcome of that, and, how this all fits into the larger scheme of things, essentially. You're muted, I think.
Yeah, so we have to look at some of the numbers to understand the relative impact of Bihar versus what happened in Noakhali and Bengal. So by most estimates, not exact death tolls are known about Noakhali, but what I have read, what I have found is that between 7,000 to 12,000 people were killed in Noakhali itself. And more than 22,000 Hindus were forcibly converted by most estimates that I have come across. Including the British ones. I'm quoting British ones. The Hindu estimates probably vary much more and probably have a higher number, some going as high as 50,000. But most Britishers claim that around 22,000 Hindus were forcibly converted in the Noakhali violence. I won't call it riots. It was a one-sided attack, one-sided violence. And around 7,000 to 12,000 people were killed. Comparatively in Bihar, around 3,000, again, from the same British narratives, around 3,000 to 4,000 Muslims in Bihar were killed. And probably, there was no conversion in Bihar because Hindus in those days never understood the meaning of conversion. Hindus were colonized for such a long period of time that they could not even comprehend in their minds that they can do ghar wapsi. That was the level of colonization of the Hindu mind in those days. There were occasional, people around the globe, scientists, happy. I'm digressing here, but just wanted to say something like Oppenheimer, who would embrace Hindu dharma and Hindu philosophy on their own, but they did it out of Jnana Yoga, their own pursuit of knowledge, than any Hindu playing any role in doing ghar wapsi.
Yes,
because Hindus were thoroughly colonized by that at that point of time. They're still now probably today. So in Bihar, there was no ghar wapsi. And even the exodus, if you look at the overall number of exodus from Bihar compared to what happened in Bengal, the number of people Hindus who left Bengal and came to what was going to become India later is about 5 times the number of Muslims that went from Bihar at the height of, despite whatever happened in Bihar, Muslims who went from Bihar to Bengal. It's about 5 times that number. So there are like 3.5 million people who went from Bengal, Hindus who went from Bengal to India, whereas only a couple of 800,000 or so went to the other side. So that shows there is a gap in the scale, even though many Muslims and many leftists later on tried to equate the two on equal terms. And even leaders in the Congress party in those days, including Nehru and Gandhi, tried to equate the two on similar terms. And that's why I gave the numbers in the beginning, because numbers don't lie. And individual events, individual anecdotes may be gory on both sides, may misrepresent the value and the scale of the violence. So it was not comparable, but Hindu leadership reacted much more aggressively to stop the violence against Muslims compared to the other way around.
Right, because most of the literature we read on Noakhali genocide, and I have read a lot, especially in research papers, it puts, like you said, both in the same balance. Whereas, like you said, there was no mass conversions, there were no rapes of women in Bihar. The number of atrocities was different, even the strategy was different, because in Noakhali, they used almost military strategies. They used, military strategies. They used, military tactics. 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 They used, military tac to contain that area, so to say, to cut it off from the rest of the region. Already Noakhali was in a remote region, but they even cut off all the communication lines, dug up the roads, blocked the river routes. So there was almost like a military strategy, sort of like a small scale war against Hindus in Noakhali, whereas in Bihar it was a retaliation, it was a reaction. So nobody's denying what happened in Bihar. That's why we're talking about it. But we cannot put both the things in the same balance, and also the reasoning needs to be looked at. Where in Noakhali, like we've been discussing, it was driven by an ideological stand, whereas in Bihar, it was a retaliation against such a mass violence against complete ethnic cleansing of Hindus in that particular region.
Yeah,
right?
it was a spontaneous reaction.
Spontaneous
and the
reaction.
scale of the
Right.
response was about 5 times, lower in terms of the damage it did. Not to mention that all lives are valuable, so nobody is condoning any of it. But that's the reality, and we have to, when we assess history, when we look at the impacts of historical events on future events, because they are all connected, we have to be honest about our assessment. And the reason Noakhali is also very important for one more reason, which is it also inspired people in West Pakistan, which is what initially I also wanted to highlight, including the later invasion of Jammu and Kashmir in 1947. So the princely state of Jammu and Kashmir at that time in 1947, even Noakhali had impact on even that, because they really believed, the leadership in the Islamic community really believed that Hindus cannot respond, and Hindus in a situation where they are isolated and in smaller numbers, they will not be able to counter the Muslims.
Right, that is extremely important to remember, because Noakhali preceded all of this. The ethnic cleansing of Hindus and Sikhs in Punjab or in other Western provinces, and in Kashmir, which was an independent state at that point of time. So
Correct.
this basically gave a lot of inspiration and a lot of motivation to the Islamists in that region, essentially.
Yes, because the Muslim League leadership that was instrumental in inspiring Noakhali, later on, once Pakistan was created, was also the Muslim League leadership in Pakistan. So it was the same group of thought leaders and strategists who were working within a period of 2-3 years. And actually, Brigadier General Akbar Khan, who was the Pakistani military leader who was given the task of invading Kashmir, along with the grandfathers of what is present the Taliban today. In those days were called the tribals, Kabalis, or whatever you want to call them.
Right.
They were literally the grandfathers of what constitutes Taliban today. He in his book wrote about it. He didn't mention Noakhali, but he said that the Muslim leadership had gathered the wisdom that Hindus can be defeated if they can be isolated from mainstream India, which is exactly the template that was followed at Noakhali.
Right. So in that sense, Kolkata was an experiment gone wrong by the Muslim leadership, and Noakhali was an experiment gone right in that sense.
Correct. But that experiment again went wrong when the Indian Air Force landed in Srinagar in 1947. So
right.
they keep
that still happened after the Mirpur and Baramulla massacres, right? So by that time they had already waged enough violence to to kill a huge number of Hindus and to drive Hindus out of what is now called as Kashmir, basically.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. Yeah, Punch and Rajouri and all those areas, they had taken over a lot of that area.
Right. So there's one other aspect to this whole thing, which is always very mired in confusion, which was I come back to it. I've asked all our speakers this, and I want to ask you as well. What was the role of the British in the Noakhali genocide? So I wanted to take your view on this as well. Would you say it was a stand of indifference, or would you say they were complicit in not acting against the mobs, or was it something else? Did they have an agenda, essentially?
So based on what I understand, I would say they lay somewhere between, in a scale of complicity and indifference, they lay somewhere in between, halfway between complicity and indifference. I would not put them anywhere to the right side of indifference, because the British really by this time were not interested. They were not interested. They were not trying to. They understood. The British understood very well that Hindus are the nicer ones in this narrative. Because I'll tell you, if you read the Time magazine cover from that time, because these are important markers. So the Time magazine cover from April 22nd, 1946 shows two tigers attacking India and a photo of Muhammad Ali Jinnah.
Do you have the picture to share? You can share it if you like.
Yes, let me try to do that. Share screen. You have to let me share the screen.
Okay. Yeah, you can keep speaking. I'll just give you the access in the meantime, or you can just send the file to me. I think that might be faster right now.
Okay.
I want our audience to see that picture.
Yeah. No, it is important. I'm gonna send you a web capture and
sure.
And I'm gonna text it to you here.
Yes.
If you can share it with our audience chat and see, I can. Actually, it might be better for me to share. I'm
just trying to figure out. Unfortunately, Zoom has not been very kind to me today. So,
okay.
Okay, I'm just making you. Sorry, this is my cat trying to help me out. So
I can share the screen now. Yeah, I can share the screen.
You can share now? Okay.
Yeah. Can you see my screen?
Yes, now I can see it.
Okay, so this is and then you will see other graphics, photographs.
Yes,
also.
Yes, right.
But this is the Time magazine cover from April 22nd, 1946, which is primarily May, June, July, August, September, October, 6 months before Noakhali happened.
Right.
So that, and just a couple of months before Direct Action Day. So this Time magazine cover, because Time magazine, even though is not exactly British, it represented the Western mindset of how they perceived the situation in India. And you can see it is a grim face of Jinnah with a lion and two tigers, one tiger attacking from the east and one tiger attacking from the west. So the British were very well aware of what the Muslims were doing in terms of their aggression. That kind of tells me that the response they gave lay somewhere between indifference and complicity, because they probably wanted to, who wants an ancient civilization with so much history to make it through successfully?
Right. And that also shows that they were very clear about what was going to happen. I mean, this picture is exactly how the partition really happened, right? The two tigers attacking. This is exactly how Jinnah played it out. So they were very.
Notice the line they had drawn. So they can see that, Kashmir, again, if you see, the British really didn't see the Kashmir region to come to India. And look at what, if that map had actually panned out, look at the Punjab region. Delhi would have been literally a couple of 100 miles from the Pakistan border, literally like less than 100 miles from the Pakistan border. And Islamabad would have been securely inside the Pakistan border. But it didn't turn out that way, thanks to Sardar Patel. Islamabad ended up being a few hundred miles from the international border, and Delhi was secure on the inside. So, these are small little, these are not written words, but if you look into the graphics and the depictions of those times, you can read a lot, sometimes even more than what written words can give you.
This is extremely, prescient in some sense, because this preceded the Noakhali genocide. It's April, right? April was still a few months before. So
look at the East Bengal border as well. It shows Assam. You see the chicken's neck, which is what is present the chicken's neck in Cooch Behar, barely making it to the to India. But the Jalpaiguri, Darjeeling, gang, that area. But the rest, entire Assam is being depicted as part of Pakistan. So again, you can see how the British were thinking, or at least the Western world was thinking in those days.
Yes. So this basically, makes it very clear that it is not something which was surprise to the British, so to say, that it's not that something which suddenly happened, which they did not see coming, or any of those reasoning, which is usually given. for their failure to act. So one, at least this is something which is my perspective, is that whenever they have initially tried to control riots between Hindus and Muslims, British officers were also very brutally butchered. So they did not really want to, partly they did not want to get tangled up in that mess because they did not want to lose anymore. And this was 1946, means after the World War. So the British were really not in a position to lose any more resources or men. So that was, at least that's what I personally think is one of the reasons why they failed to act. And the other was, like you said, it was not as innocuous as indifference, but somewhere between indifference and complicit. So if this kind of a conflict essentially helps them in some way in controlling the region, or even serves their agenda in the future, then why stop it from happening? Is that do you concur with me on that?
I agree with you. I agree with you. And interestingly, since I'm showing this graphics, and you can tell me when you want me not to share the screen.
Sure.
The right picture on the right side is a picture. Probably you already have this picture. Is Sucheta Kriplani at the site where the famous Chaudhary family of Hindu family, the local area landowners, was
Rajendra Chaudhary, Lal Chaudhary, basically.
correct. So Rajendra Chaudhary was beheaded, and his head was served on a platter
Right.
to Sarwar Hussaini, I think was the name of the Muslim
Right.
Sufi leader. I have to say he was a peace.
Yes.
So again, something for our people in modern times to note. So he was his body and his family's body was really thrown into a swamp. So Sucheta Kriplani and Gandhiji actually recovered that body and cremated them in Hindu tradition, in Hindu method of cremation. So in some ways this was probably something that was good on Gandhiji's part, but in a bigger picture, as I said, his failure to protect the Hindus was tremendously detrimental from the strategic point of view.
Exactly. So I think I'll stop the sharing now. I think, yeah. So any other remarks you think? I mean, I think I've asked you most of my questions, but any other remarks you think on the failure of the Hindu leadership or the future of the Bengali Hindus in that whole region? I mean, I don't want to call it East Bengal, West Bengal also, because the kind of history of both East and West Bengal is so intertwined, and the history is so intertwined. Even the strategic methods used for ethnic cleansing are so similar in both the regions. So the future of Bengalis, essentially Bengali Hindus. So what do you have to say on that, or any other comments you want to add here, basically?
So I think in general, Bengal and Bengalis have to do a course correction. Because what happened in Noakhali has left its impact even on current generation of Bengalis in many ways. And the course correction can happen on both sides of Bengal, on both the Hindus and the Muslims. On the Muslims, I believe the course correction can be because Muslims really don't have to be ideologically and intellectually enslaved to the Islamist ideology in Bengal. In 1971, they showed that they could, for a moment, small moment in history, detach themselves from Islamism and be part of the civilization that they take pride in for most things. So the Bengali Muslim has the ability to do that again and probably do a course correction in that respect. And that will be good for all of eastern part of the Indian subcontinent. The Bengali Hindu has to understand that Noakhali was just the beginning of one of the most violent episodes of the entire Indian subcontinent's history that directly affected Bengali Hindus. What you see in Bengal today, the decline in industry, the decline in education, the decline in intellectualism, the decline as a civilization of what Bengali was within the Hindu larger Hindu context, started at Noakhali in many ways. I mean, it started earlier also, but Noakhali was a key nodal point of that decline. And what Noakhali started led to the riots and the aggressive expulsion of Hindus from East Bengal in the 1950s, in the 1960s, and eventually culminating in the complete genocide of about 3 million, 2.8 million Bengali Hindus in 1971, causing 10 million Bengali Hindus to become refugees in a small region of Eastern India, which is in Indian Bengal, leading to a complete economic collapse, leading to a complete socio-political collapse, leading to the entrance of Marxism, leading to a societal level of Stockholm syndrome that is currently prevalent in Bengal. So it's a cascade of multiple events that many Bengali leaders, irrespective of whether they are Hindutva or not, can make an attempt to introspect on. And if we do that introspection, I think good things can come out of it. But this introspection is not just for the Bengali Hindu, as I said in the beginning, it is also for the Bengali Muslim. They have to arrest their Islamization, because then what the Bengal that they fought for in 1947, the Bangladesh that they fought for in 1971, yeah, will not exist either. So that is the Bengali Muslims, as a Bengali Hindu, I can encourage them to think along those lines.
Right. So I think that's a very important point, because if we had done this course correction a little earlier, the subsequent events may not have happened, right? So I think somebody wants to ask a question.
So can I ask a question?
Yes, please go ahead. I won't be able to put you on the spotlight, but you can speak. Yeah.
Okay. So since the Bengali Muslims, you suggested they are part of the Indian Bharatiya civilization, so they don't need to subscribe the Islamized ideology of Arabia. So since the ancestors, the Bengali Hindus and Muslims, we have common ancestors, and the Bengali Bengali Muslims forefathers were also Hindus or Buddhists, the people of dharmic traditions. So is it a good idea for them to return to the dharmic ideology of their forefathers, for Bengali Muslims? If they return to the dharmic philosophy and traditions of their forefathers, so can it be a good solution for sustainable peace and prosperity?
Well, for most part of the eastern part of the Indian subcontinent's history, even the Bengalis who were converted to Islam until the 19th century weren't even considered really Muslim in the modern context. It was the Wahhabization of Bengal, and I use the Wahhabization here very significantly, carefully, because the Faraisi movement by Titu Mir and Haji Shariatullah in the early part of the British rule, which was directly inspired by then at that time the nascent Wahhabi Muslim movement in Saudi Arabia. So Haji Shariatullah went on pilgrimage to Makkah and was directly inspired by the Wahhabi movement that was growing in Saudi Arabia in the late 19th century, early 19th century. And he came back to Bengal and started the Faraisi movement, which in many ways is similar to the Tablighi Jamaat movement that came on in Haryana later on, in the 100 years later. And the Faraisi movement led to Titu Mir. Titu Mir led to the Islamization and rapid, Quranization of the Bengali population. But that also wasn't enough. I mean, the Bengalis resisted Islamization for, out of the 400, 500 years that Bengal has been fully Islamized, they have resisted it for 90% of their own history. So a Bengali Muslim probably is the best person to analyze this and figure out a path of Gharwapsi for themselves in future. I mean, we don't have to inspire them. They have done a better job than us in resisting Islamization, except in the last 100 years.
So can the people of dharmic traditions like us, can we do something for that? Means rationally thinking in a rational way.
We can be the purveyors of knowledge. We can be the purveyors of resistance and means that they can use to do Gharwapsi. And most importantly, and this is the part which is the hardest one, we can be their protectors once they do Gharwapsi. That is the part we are the worst at. We cannot protect ourselves. So if somebody even does Gharwapsi, how are we, that's the first question they will ask, that under Islamic law, they're supposed to be killed if they become apostates and return back to their Hindu dharma. How are you going to protect us? And that's a question we have to ask ourselves and eventually answer.
Right. So I think that answers a very important question. We have one more question from somebody. Sukan Kole is asking why the Mukti Bahini didn't choose to be part of India and have a united Bengal, then have a separate country post defeat of Pakistan in 1971 war.
Because the Mukti Bahini's leadership, Mujibur Rahman, I don't see at any point in the development of the independence movement in Bangladesh when they really wanted or explicitly said that they wanted to be part of India. In most sense, I believe that if after 1971 India stayed as an occupying force in Bangladesh, what is present day Bangladesh, at some point of time they would have risen in quote unquote aggression against whoever was from India in that region. Well, I do believe that what India should have helped in doing, and this was a different India in those days, it was completely socialist, Soviet Unionized India. So they didn't have the value, they didn't understand the value of dharma, Hindu dharma and Dharwapsi in those days at all. I had long conversation with B. Raman, who was, he's no more, but he at that time was a senior official in the India's intelligence agencies of that time. And he told me that, yeah, we didn't really understand the value of Dharwapsi. But that was the time when, Bengal was ready to embrace its civilization in true terms. And we figured it.
Right. So thank you so much, Utsavda, for so many great insights. So unfortunately, I did not read out his bio. So I just wanted to give a small introduction to Utsavda, although he's already spoken. But Utsavda is an architect by profession, and he has been presenting the case of Hindu and other subaltern communities to thought leaders in Washington, D.C. for more than 18 years. He's an astute observer of geopolitical trends inside the Washington Beltway, and his works have been presented to the lawmakers at Capitol Hill and to representatives of the Human Rights Commission at the United Nations. He is currently volunteering as the executive director of Hindu Pact, and his interests span geopolitics, sociopolitical movements, and religions, and it stems from his exposure to the history of architecture, the built environment, and its impact on peoples and civilization. So thank you so much, Utsavda, for bringing in your insights. And I wanted to specifically bring you in because you have a very deep insight into the geopolitics of Bengal. And you have presented the case of Hindus, Bengali Hindus specifically, to human rights organizations around the world. So thank you so much for joining. And in the next session, we have Rajat Mitra. I think he's already logged in. So he will log in now. Rajat, can you hear me? So namaste, Utsavda. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Okay, so I think Rajat Mitra is already here. So namaste, Rajat. Are you able to hear me?
Yeah, I'm able to hear you.
Okay, great. So unfortunately, your session got a bit delayed because of some technical glitches, but we will go ahead as per schedule. So for those of you who don't know, Rajat Mitra is a public speaker, a psychologist, and a psychotherapist, and he's the author of the book, The Infidel Next Door, and he has spoken extensively on the trauma caused by genocides of Hindus. So thank you, Rajat ji, for joining us today. And my question to you is, it's a very simple one. So, a lot of times we hear this argument that, this genocide happened 75 years ago. Why are we bothering about it now? Why not let bygones be bygones? That kind of an argument, which is given by people in general. I don't even want to give them any labels. And, I wanted to hear from you why it's important to get the testimony of victims of these type of genocides, and what is the impact of these genocides on people, and why is there such a huge impact on people? Because we need to understand why these kind of events like the Noakhali Genocide impact the course of history itself. So please go ahead.
Thank you, Aarti, and I think it's a pleasure to be here. First of all, let us ask ourselves a couple of things. The issue of genocides, are they ever raised on time? I mean, tell me a single genocide which has been raised on time, that it finishes and then we immediately go and, say that, look, this has happened. There is a deep time lag between the end of the genocide
Right.
and then when people raise it, right?
Yes.
So it is true with all genocides, all mass killings throughout history.
Right.
There is no exception, none whatsoever, where, the day the mass killing or the genocide ended, the next day we were in courts or we were, there and saying that, let's start it. So to those who say that, I would like to ask them that, please mention one single mass killing or genocide which was raised on time, right?
Right.
It never does, right? It takes approximately an average of 2 to 3 generations before we start raising it out. There are reasons for it. One is that genocide or mass killing, it reduces the human psyche, or as we call it, the human brain, in the survival mode. If a whole race, if a whole nation is subjected to mass trauma, the first priority of those people is how to survive. And
Exactly.
it takes approximately 1 to 2 generations to realize that we are safe again. And it is then we start doing introspection, right? Now, for example, no Jew ever did introspection in the concentration camp. They started their introspection 30 years after the Holocaust was over, and they had to fight their way through, a mass of denial and opposition to make it around, to make it known to the world. Secondly, the world doesn't want to know about genocide. Let's be very frank. When genocides happened, for example, when the Jewish genocide happened, America was quiet. They didn't utter a word, right? The entire European world was quiet. They didn't utter a word. They knew about it, right? So, for example, one of my friends who told me about it is that, he was in Washington, and the Jewish Holocaust Museum was built, and he was from Rwanda, and he had to talk about it. And he felt a sense of deep unrealities. He said, I'm just a few hundred yards away from the Holocaust Museum, whose motto is never again. And here am I talking and telling the world about it, and people are asking me whether it really happened or not, right? So we don't have a ready audience in the world for them to know and get themselves aware or knowledgeable about the genocide. It hurts us because, for example, the Serbian genocide, Europeans could not believe that white people could do that, and it was a few, 100 miles away from the Western civilization, as they, would call it, right? So it is not very easy to project genocide, how it happens. It is a long struggle. It's a fight with people opposing it. Like, if, for example, let's take the most, unique genocide in a way. So far, I would say, I think that when we are able to establish Hindu genocide, we have to do that through its own uniqueness itself. For example, when the Jewish, genocide was there, this person, David Irvine, a British historian, he published a book which said that the Holocaust never happened. There were no gas chambers, and this figure of 6 million is a total, fluke. And this person, Deborah Lipstadt, who was a university professor, she had to go take painstaking data to prove that he was wrong. The battle went on for 4 years, right? So we need to know that we have a similar struggle ahead of ourselves in a similar way, right? The world is not eager to know about it. the world would like to push it away, right? The Hindu genocide, because each genocide tells us something about ourselves from which we cannot run away from. If you see the Security Council, the 5 members, the white America has committed a genocide on its native populations. And when Lemkin talked about the definition of genocide, they worked very hard to see that their own killing of the native people does not come up.
Right.
Russia opposed it because Lenin and Stalin, what they had done, they didn't want that history to come up, right?
Right.
Mao Zedong, he, thanks to Nehru, who got in, Nehru who got them in the Security Council,
Yeah.
they did not want to talk about their genocide. The French did not want to talk about their genocide in Algiers, right? Who's left then, right? They all have history to hide. So when you are talking about it, the fear amongst all of them is that our history is also going to get exposed, right?
It's like a Pandora's box which we are opening when we're talking about a genocide.
So,
Basically.
all the Security Council members, for example, their nations, their governments, they have committed genocide, of people, right? Like in Russia, we can say that it was a killing of the same group. So it was not of another group. So technically it's not genocide, but it is still the killing of 6 to 8 million people.
We are politicized, basically.
Exactly. So the world is not very eager to hear about it, and survival takes a long time, for people to come up with this. And let me, put it a point over here. Why are we having this seminar right now on Noakhali genocide after 75 years? Because somewhere it has taken us all this time to get out of the sense of safety that we were working in. We have, I would say, a government that gives Hindus a sense of decorum, of safety, for us to start exploring and looking into it. We have that sense of safety arising in us right now in the last, I would say, primarily 8 or 9 years. And we have the medium. So therefore, we are bringing up this issue of Hindu genocide right now. And you can see the threat that the people who do not want to come out, how they are opposing that and how they are dealing with it right now, right? So it is, I would say, a major, issue. But we need to ask ourselves that why hasn't this Noakhali issue died? The issue could have died down. Why, after 75 years, you and I are sitting over and talking over, and people are
at 11 p.m.
At 11 p.m. Yes, and we are talking about it. The reason I would say for that is that genocides are carried by people's memory. It is not carried by history. Like yours, mine, ancestors who were victims of it as a mass, collective, they held on to that memory. They did not bring it up then. They passed it on to their next generation, to their next generation. And perhaps this is the 4th or the 5th generation that right now is sitting forward to discuss this, to bring it up, because it is somewhere which bothers you and me. And after this seminar, it will bother more people and more people till the time that we reach a critical mass, a threshold, when people would say that, look, this happened, and I think that we need answers for this.
You're bothered enough to do something about it.
So that doesn't die. And there is a difference between history and memory. History is like, recording of facts. And they very often are written by those people who want facts to be hidden. But memory is carried by victims, by people who go through that, which never dies. And it surfaces one day after 3 or 4 generations. So that is the explanation for why it is rising right now. So, and I think it's, I would say, a golden moment in that sense for us as a race, as people, to raise up this issue in the memory of our ancestors who were brutally killed.
Right. So this brings me to the other question which I wanted to ask. That a lot of times people think that it's sort of like I said, it's an episode of history. So the second argument is that what is the impact of genocides on the future generations? I know you already spoke about this in part already, but in based on the testimony of the victims and my own, I've spoken to lots of victims and I've studied a lot of testimonies. So in my understanding, it basically changes the whole trajectory of millions of people, not just those who directly faced the assault, right? So for example, even if one member of one family is killed or raped or brutalized in some other way, that impact is not just on that one person but on all the family members and the next generation and the next generation. So this is at least what I have understood, but of course my understanding is based only on what I have read and heard from people. I wanted your insight on this, that what does psychology talk about this? What is the actual impact of these kind of atrocities on people?
Okay, the impact of these atrocities, it's often called as transgenerational or intergenerational trauma, and it has been now seen, and there is conclusive, I would say, evidence coming about that it is, it gets transferred to our genes.
Right.
Intergenerational trauma, it is something that our genes carry from generation to generation. So, for example, the blacks, the natives, of America who were exterminated, they have carried it as, they are carrying it as a genetic component. The trauma does not die, and
Right.
it is something that gets passed on from generation to generation. And many of the present psychological issues that the race, the people go through, they are directly coming from that source. So I think that the impact of that is, something that is too big. So, for example, many of the issues that you find blacks struggling with and fighting with right now are transgenerational trauma, like post-traumatic stress disorder. You also call it post-traumatic slave disorder. There is a term for it, which talks about that how, slavery is something that still runs in terms of a mindset in blacks. Now, it also runs, I would say, in us Hindus. We have been slaves for almost 800 to 1,000 years,
Yeah.
a large majority of our population. And many of our behaviors, the way we do right now, it is probably descending from slavery itself that we have undergone, that we have not changed. As a psychologist, I do notice this very often, and I trace it back to our colonial history, our Mughal history, and that how it impinges upon that. I'm researching upon this right now, and I hope that one day I would be able to write probably the first book of its kind about how it has impinged upon us and how it makes us unable to do many things which we would have done had we not been slaves in the first place, right? The British, for example, they destroyed our education system. They destroyed our libraries. They destroyed, most important, our capacity for imagination, our capacity for being creative and thinking for ourselves. That's why you notice that Indians do very well all over the world, but they don't do very well in India, because
Yes.
we demean ourselves constantly. Everything Indian is wrong. We criticize ourselves so much. We berate ourselves, we demean ourselves, which is amazing. I mean, for example, many psychologists, friends of mine who come to India, they feel very amazed. They they say that we thought that the British left 70 years ago, but they continue through your behavior, right? Now, there is not much awareness about it. We have not started looking into this. And if we start talking about genocide, if we talk about mass killings, all this will also start simultaneously.
Right. That's, I think, a very, very important insight. And I'm really looking forward to your book whenever you finish it. I think it will be a seminal work on this topic because it's important for people to understand why they behave the way they behave. Right.
Sure.
So, because we all like to talk about, why are Hindus like this and Hindus are slaves, but there's a very valid explanation for it. So that doesn't mean that we continue to behave as slaves. It just means that
No.
we, activate other genes by sheer willpower and come out of that slavery and, take our destiny in our own hands, essentially. So thank you so much, Rajatji, for all this very detailed and scientific explanation of how genocides impact civilizations. Now, there's one last question I have for you, which is that you've given the individual and the genetic impact of genocides and why it's difficult to recognize genocides. But is there some comment you would like to give on, the impact on an entire civilization? So, from a civilizational point of view, from a policy point of view, from economic point of view, a lot also. So is there something you would like to say that, for example, like I feel that the plunder of the British, like you were describing, it was economic, but this, at least I like to call it like a psychological plunder, which puts you into that kind of, economic poverty or impoverished behavior. So, it's not just limited to the way you react to genocides or to crimes, but also how much wealth you can manifest, how much creativity you can manifest. So I'm still talking on an individual level here, though. So is there something existing, or is there something which is your own opinion on the civilizational impact of such a genocide?
I think I think yes, the civilizational impact is of there are several unique factors about it. I think that it has been the longest continuing genocide for almost 1 millennium. The way it started, and the annihilation was based upon the fact that we belong to a certain religion. So the fact is that in 11th century, people who destroyed temples, and in the present century, people who destroy temples, they have the same ideology. So at that time, for say a person from that time, if they are transferred to the present time, they won't find much change and difference. They will say that, what we started, it's continuing. In terms of the messages, for example, the Kashmiri Hindus, when they ran away, the main reason for running away was because their women were threatened, and the same thing happened also in 11th century. So there is a continuity that we see throughout from the 11th century till the present, which has gone unhindered. And all the killings, whether it's the Noakhali killing, or it's the direct action day killing, or it is the Kashmiri, Hindus killing, or it is say any of the riots or which have taken place, of which there are numerous things. All these are tied together in one sequence, in one chain, which cannot be separated from each other. It is all part of an organized way of looking at our civilization as less than theirs. It is like what we call of as us versus them. So we are seen as lesser by the Abrahamic religions, who feel that we have no right to exist. And this has had a continuity from almost 1,000 years, ever since it has been there. The second thing is we need to recognize that it needs to be taught in our schools, and it will not give rise to hatred. That's what I'm asked very often, that if you talk about it, won't it give rise to hatred? The answer is no. And for example, the person who asked me, I said, that tell me two things. When Martin Luther King, of whom you are a great fan of, he tried to take out a rally, he was told that why you are disturbing the peace of the place. And his answer was, peace is not the absence of justice. So do you think that he was right or wrong in saying that? Now, he was a great admirer. I mean, he said, no. He said that, but, you know, it applies there. Do we have to do it over here? So I said that why? You know, it's you mean to say peace is the absence of justice? It only applies in USA. It does not apply in India, and it only applies to black, and it doesn't apply over here. So he said, no, I'm not mean. You know, I don't mean that, but you know, etc., etc. Secondly, I asked him. I said, our motto is Satyamev Jayate. Do you believe in that? So he says, of course, you know, I do believe in that. So he says that you are telling me that I should not talk about the Satya, but the Asatya and bring that out. Do you want me to do that? Do you want us to do that? So he says, no, I don't want to do that. But can't we, you know, go ahead and, you know, change it a little bit? I said, truth is truth. If you dilute it, if you try to change it, then let's change our slogan. Let's not talk of Satyamev Jayate. We have adopted this, and you know, if we are afraid of facing the truth, then I don't think that we should have that as our national emblem, and we should say Asatyamev Jayate. Great, go ahead, right? Let's erase the past. Let's change everything, saying that, you know, I mean, we are doing it for the sense of safety and security of our people. Let's not talk about them Satyamev Jayate. Why don't you go ahead and do that? So he kept quiet. He didn't talk to me any
So
further.
we can just live 1984, basically.
Yeah.
So
I think that's that would be what I would say in a nutshell, what I would suggest. Yeah.
Right. So in some sense, you know, not acknowledgement of a genocide basically leads to more genocides. It continues that vicious cycle of victimization of a certain community. Yeah, right.
Sure.
So thank you so much, Rajat-ji, and I'm so sorry to keep you up so late. There were some technical glitches in your joining here. And thanks to all the audience who joined here today, either on Zoom or on live. And we will be uploading all the individual segments of the very long event today for easier listening and easier watching. And hopefully we can also get some live transcription for this up. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining. And for everybody who would like to have a summary sort of a thing for this Noakhali genocide, you can download Shantanu Shinghasji's book. The link is there on our webpage. It's hindugenocide.com/Noakhali. So you can get his book or his booklet from that page. And if you would like to donate to us, the link is there on that page as well. So thank you for supporting us. Thank you for watching. And namaste, Shubhratri. Good night. Thank you.